to get information, exchange ideas, and give direction to staff. If you don't have a copy of our agenda tonight and you would like one, there should be one back on the cart. There'll be an opportunity for public comment after each item on the agenda. But in case you need to leave early and can't wait until then, we'll give you an opportunity to comment at the very beginning of the meeting and also at the very end on anything that wasn't on our agenda tonight. So if you, before I turn it over for public comment on items not on our agenda, or if you can't wait on the items that will be on our agenda, I'm going to look to our new city administrator for the week. Assistant City Administrator Kevin Iflin. Kevin, do you have anything in the way of preliminaries for us before we go to public comment and then item number one?
So, Mayor, just have one thing tonight. We were going to have an executive session prior to this. It was on kind of the draft schedule. There wasn't anything super pertinent to have an executive session for that, but City Attorney Gina Dahl just has some public brief updates on one or two things possibly that we just want to touch base with you on, and then we'll move forward with the agenda items.
Okay, thank you. Gina.
Thank you, Mayor. And that's correct. There really isn't anything substantive to update council on tonight. So I just wanted to give you some limited information, just a couple of status updates, just so that you don't think I'm neglecting to give you these litigation updates. So I know that council is interested in the public nuisance cases, and so wanted to let you know that that two have been filed. I think you're aware of that. There are two cases pending. Those are both set for trial. They're still in the early phases yet, and unfortunately, the case involving 802 Yellowstone Avenue, that person is appearing pro se and is trying to find an attorney. But as I said, it is set for trial and it's moving along. The case involving the Colonial at 223 South 27th Street, that's the case. Unfortunately, the attorney representing Mr. Skauge has passed away, and so he is currently looking for another attorney, and that may unfortunately delay that case a bit. As I think has been mentioned at some point previously, there are about 5 additional cases that our office is looking at filing. But we delayed that process in getting those complaints actually filed with the court because, as you know, Thomas Pardee was recently appointed to the bench, and that position handled the code enforcement cases and the filing of those nuisance complaints. And so we didn't want to get a bunch of cases filed that there was no attorney to work on them. So those cases are generally ready to go. Todd Korn from our office is moving from the criminal division to the civil division, and as soon as he gets fully transitioned and up to speed, we expect that those will be filed in the near future. The franchise fee cases, as you know, is still in the claims filing period, and class members or not class members have until August 31st to file a claim or to opt out or to file an objection. So there isn't anything new happening there. The fairness hearing will be held on November 17th for the court to consider the settlement agreement and any objections to the settlement. There are several other MMIA cases that are pending right now, but I'm still waiting for some updates from some of those outside counsel, the attorneys representing the city. And so I will update you on those as I get those. But again, nothing substance is really happening with those. They're all in the discovery phase at this point. So most of them aren't even set for trial. So if you want any particular more detail or want to talk about them thoroughly, just call me in the office tomorrow and we can talk about it in more detail. And I'll give you an update in the next 3 to 4 to 5 weeks, probably, in an executive session. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Gina. Anything else, Kevin?
Nope, Mayor, that's it.
Okay, thanks very much. Then we'll open up for public comment on all items, whether on the agenda tonight or not. Again, if you can wait till we actually get into an item, we encourage you to wait until then, but if you need to leave, please feel free to comment now. Please come forward. We just ask you to tell us your name and your address and keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Wesley Don, 832 Heights, Montana, opclearinghouse@gmail.com. Just want to do a little recap on the water situation. Current water system is too old for the current demands. I'm trying to point that out. I think I did to some of you. Stop planning. It's too old right now as it is. Stop the planning. Staples pump station is too old for the current demand. Stop planning. We need to look in a different direction. Memorial Day water main break was just one example of the system not being able to hold the current demand. Stop planning. We lost 4 million gallons of that right there. The system cannot hold it. You can't pump and pump and pump and pump and expect everything to keep working. Q2 interviewed Mike Dotson, which Mike Dotson is a senior equipment operator for Utilities Department, about this main break. Mike Dotson told the truth. Good for him. That's one city employee that I've heard, interviewed to tell the truth. So I'm going to give him kudos. It's good to see him grow up a little bit. So, House 200. It's done. Yay. Thank anybody that had any part to do with that. Thank you. Now we're on to House 199, and I'm pretty sure why I'm standing here right now. Y'all know what house that is. Kevin, how's the house, the task force, properties task force that I created coming for y'all? What's a shame about that, problem properties, is that they left the public out. Any other task force that you have out there in the community, the public is welcome to come and voice their opinion. But this task force that they created, that I helped create, I'm not invited to. I don't think that's right. Let's look into that. Mr. Chorkey, there's 6 people vying for your position. Right now, I still have a voice. And I will make sure one of those 6 besides you will get that position. Ms. Joy, you can now give your position away. Thank you.
Next.
Amber Dunn, Dorothy Lane. First, I'd like to say the reason he says that is because you literally said you couldn't give your position away when there's 6 people fighting for his. I beg to differ with you. Secondly, thank you to the handful of you that actually helped us with this situation. You know who you are. There's no need for me to point you out. You know who you didn't help. That's also sitting up here. Mutual. Guess it wasn't, because someone just got sentenced to 8 years in prison. So yet again, your chief of police still has a job when he lied to all of your faces. That's a problem. I know you guys are talking about this $143 million thing that's going on right now, and you want to put it on the voters, but just so you know, you should look up Cat Country, did an article on it. Says some truths in there, what we've been saying. There's no need for that. You need a jail. You need better safety in the city. And just an update, our entire street is about 98% drug-free right now. There's still 1 or 2 guys that still like to come and try to do drug deals on the walking trail. But we have some friends down there that are putting a stop to it, just as we were. So it just shows, once again, nothing was mutual. We live next door to the loudest drug dealer in the city of Billings. Thanks.
Thank you. Other public comment? Is there any other public comment before we move on to item number 1? Don't see any. There's no one online, so I'll close the public comment period and move on to our first item, which is the downtown street restoration and construction and two-way restoration project. So, Debbie, I guess, is our presenter. Is that right, Debbie?
I am not the presenter, I'm the introducer.
Okay.
So you have the team here tonight, so Mehmet from DBA, I know you guys have talked to him a lot, and then Matt Fogelsong, the city engineer, is here, and then Sarah Plath, who I don't think you've met yet, is an engineer with our engineering division, and she's here as well. So you've got lots of people for your questions, and I think Mehmet's gonna start it.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Mehmet Casey with the Downtown Billings Partnership. And yes, I'm starting us off with a few slides here, the introduction to the project. So general project itself, as you can see here from the list of the partners and both in the logo format and the written format, the Downtown Billings, the City of Billings, and Dowell and Kittleson are the partners. And the team that will be working on this project. The project, the full design includes a traffic study that is completed currently at 30% design. And then the two-way restoration project itself is planned for the summer of 2024. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then the other piece that we wanted to keep our minds on has its own timeline and it has involvement with the MDT, but it was part of the study and the investigation on how to create a calmer environment along Montana Avenue. So you'll see some references to it on the maps and the other slides. I'd like to start with this cool picture, courtesy of Western Heritage Center of Broadway. Back from 1914, just kind of showing the natural tendency of a downtown environment and how it evolves and how it's ongoing, in an ongoing manner, always evolving. So what you see here on the street is you'll see a few modes of transportation in front of you, and the arrows point at them. So there is a bicyclist, right there to the left of the screen. There is a pedestrian and kind of closer to the trolley trying to cross the street. There is a trolley. There is a rider on a horse. There's a carriage back here, and then there is a vehicle, a car. So that is essentially the nature of a downtown. Downtowns are complex environments, and downtowns are ever evolving, and downtowns try to accommodate multiple modes of transportation for everybody to be able to access the environment and be able to arrive to their destinations in a safe manner and in an enjoyable manner and in an efficient manner. So with that, the project that we're looking at, the map here outlines the streets that we'll be working on. You'll see what's missing on the map is 29th and 30th because they've already been converted. 27th is already two-way, and it's a state highway. Broadway is also already two-way, but then the other lines that you'll see, the north to south streets are lined up here in the light green color, and the east to west streets are in the darker green color. Those are the ones that are currently one-ways, and those are the ones that will be looking at becoming two-ways. And then the dotted line is the Montana Avenue road diet, which again has its own timeline and its own project, but it was in the study and in the plan. Two-way restoration project goals. Again, ultimately, the goal is to support the vitality of the downtown area, and by doing so, how do we do so? Is first and foremost is to improve the livability and stimulate economic growth in the area. We all know that when you reach out to businesses to recruit businesses, no one's looking at one ways to open their business on. You can go talk to big names, big brands, big establishments, big anchor businesses right now. That's not on their number one of targeting a space to move into. So, and then similarly, the shoppers that are going to frequent those businesses will feel more comfortable on two ways rather than one ways because of a multitude of things, whether we're accessing it as a pedestrian or as a biker where we feel safer and comfortable to pursue that, or the convenience and accessibility of being able to go in multi-directions in multi-ways to access that business. So promoting safety, safety comes from the reduced speeds, the traffic calming that is created on those two ways. And they're not like any other two ways that you might experience in the city of Billings, where it might be multi-lane two-way. They're single-lane two ways, again, for that creation of the calmer traffic. So you're, as a motorist, you're still able to navigate downtown, and you're still able to get to your destination, but the pedestrians and the bikers and folks that are on wheelchairs are able to navigate those streets as well at a much higher level of comfort. Better access to downtown, again, having the options and the convenience and the ability to go in all directions. Increasing walkability, again, that is produced by slower speeds, therefore making it more comfortable to walk and access crosswalks, and the occasional, jaywalkers. That's, something that will happen in a downtown environment. I think you all remember and recall a while ago we came before you and we requested installing a flashing beacon on Montana Avenue in order to encourage motorists to stop at a crosswalk, and it's been working since then. But you can see without that, people were not comfortable crossing on a one-way that gives them much more likelihood of an environment similar to a highway, especially in a multi-lane situation too. And increasing multimodal connectivity, again, we talked a little bit about that, namely the bike facilities that are comfortable for many users to access. So something that you actually feel comfortable jumping on and riding, or having multiple people ride it, or having even minors be able to ride it safely. SEPTA principles. I was lucky enough to attend the basic 40-hour SEPTA training, crime prevention through environmental design, in the second to last week of May. And I was surprised that this is also on the curriculum of SEPTA trainings, two-way streets. For a lot of us, it might be intuitive, it might be back of the head, but they were intentional in including it in their curriculum to showcase that they do increase the opportunities for more what they call witness potential for both aspects of pedestrians and drivers. If you're more comfortable walking and biking, you're providing more eyes on the street from multi directions, whether it's the walker, the driver, the biker, but it's also a driver who's not speeding through traffic lights, is having more time to pay attention to what's happening, paying attention to intersections, paying attention to the businesses, might see something that is not supposed to be happening, and they're able to report that. Similarly, if someone is sitting down, enjoying a meal, and a vehicle is driving slower but also doing something they're not supposed to be doing, they have a more potential to identify the driver or the license, as opposed to if they were speeding through the street. And with one-ways, folks are always trying to get to their destination, so in a faster manner as much as possible to navigate those lights before they switch. In a two-way, people are approaching it with caution and paying attention to what's happening and trying to enjoy the environment while they're arriving to their destination. So that involves the two-way traffic, the strategic turn lane locations, the narrower lane widths, the bike infrastructure. A lot of these, as you saw in the earlier picture from the 1914 era, you have a lot of modes of transportation that are happening on the same street, and everyone is paying attention to everyone else. By activating those spaces via pedestrian and bicycle connectivity, you get that the idea is to create more comfortable space for those multi-modes of transportation, and thus those multi-modes will be comfortable to come and access and enjoy that space. And with more users, you have that more eyes on the street concept, thus the SEPTED enforcement of that, or preference for it. A little bit of background of the two-way too. I've heard all the time from folks, anecdotal different, dates, whether it was back in the 70s or back in the 80s. We now have evidence of it that in 1975, as part of the Federal Highway Administration project, that's when the conversions occurred from two-ways to one-ways. One-ways, as we stated earlier, promote traffic through a space. So try to get people from downtown and from the Heights through downtown to get them to the West End, versus two-way traffic promote traffic to a space. You're trying to get to a destination. Some of the history from earlier conversations when the two-way conversations began dates back to our 1997 Downtown Framework Plan, which was our original master plan. That's where the first call was for it. Our 2018 DBA strategic plan continues to call for it. The downtown traffic study then was initiated by the DBA and City of Billings in the year 2019. I believe that one was done by Kittleson in association with Dowell. And then Planning Department did the alternative prioritization and public preference plan, which was by Dowell, which also surveyed the public on the interest in two-ways. This was completed in 2021. If you recall, the 29th and 30th Street conversions, the conversations began in 2020 as part of the extension of the TIF district deadline, and then the actual project was completed in the summer of 2021. Took about 2 months, I believe, over the courses of months of May and June. And with that, Sarah will take over on the balancing act.
Thank you. Yep. All right. Thank you, Mehmet. I'm Sarah Plath. I'm the engineer with the City of Billings managing this project. So I think it's important to remember with projects in downtown Billings that we have a lot of factors at play. So on-street parking is important to our downtown businesses. It's also important to the public. At the same time, we're kind of lacking bike improvements through downtown Billings. A lot of the times, in order to gain bike improvements, that comes at the expense of on-street parking. So those two items kind of go head to head. One of our goals is to calm traffic downtown. At the same time, we don't want to calm it to the point where we have traffic congestion downtown that makes it hard to navigate and hard to get to where you're going. Maintenance is an important part of this project. Our street and traffic division will be maintaining the signing and striping that we install with this project. And then they also have their regular street sweeping and plowing activities that we have to be aware of while we're designing. And then, of course, cost is important. It's a big project, so we're just trying to accomplish as much as we can within the existing pavement extents. So ultimately, the goal for this project is to find a balance between all these sometimes competing interests. So Mehmet touched on it. I just want to reiterate that this project really came to be because of this ongoing partnership between the City of Billings and the DBA. The City of Billings has a handful of maintenance needs for our downtown streets. The DBA is interested in converting downtown streets to two-way. So we've really combined our efforts to try to reach our two goals as efficiently as we can. So our current downtown maintenance needs, the biggest one is our streets are due for a pavement preservation treatment. That's usually a chip seal or an overlay. The beauty of those is that we get to restripe the roads after we do those pavement preservation treatments. And so we can restripe them differently than how they are now. And that's where this kind of efficiency comes from in combining these two projects. Kind of regardless of the two-way aspect, we have a handful of signals that have outdated equipment that need upgrading. So notably on Division and 3rd, and then the intersection the signal at Grand, 6th, 32nd, and Division, those two signals need some signal upgrades regardless. We also have some older inlets that could be upgraded to our newer, higher capacity inlets. Some ADA ramps that could be updated to be more compliant. And so really, those are our maintenance needs. Again, we initially had the chip seal planned for 2021. We delayed that project in order to capitalize on this ongoing two-way effort. So Mehmet mentioned it, we've completed a traffic memo as part of this project. That memo supplements the downtown traffic study that was completed in 2019. So basically, the result of that memo is that our intersections are expected to operate at acceptable levels for urban settings. That kind of confirms what the downtown traffic study also found. So in this traffic memo, we analyzed the two-way condition for both our current year and then a future year. This analysis led to some recommendations for intersection traffic control, lane configurations, including turn lanes, and then also our bicycle infrastructure that we're proposing. We do have a handful of critical intersections. Division carries a lot of traffic, so our intersections with Division are important. We have 27th Street. Second and third intersections with 27th Street will be important to this project. And then our little malfunction junction at Grand 6th, 32nd Division is kind of a complex intersection. So I'm going to get into the recommendations a little bit here. Again, these recommendations are a result of both the traffic memo, but also our project goals that Mehmet went through. I think it's important to remember our scope of work. We're really looking at what we can do between the curb. So we're not looking at moving any curb lines. We're not looking at reconstructing sidewalks. We're trying to accomplish as much as we can within the existing pavement width. We'll have quite a few intersection modifications just with the nature of the two-way conversion, adding a second direction of travel. We'll be required to update some of those signals. We're looking at where we need new turn lanes, and we're being really strategic with where we're recommending those based off of our traffic needs. So the only new turn lanes we're recommending are on North 27th Street and then on 32nd Street and 4th Avenue North. So you can see the aerial image here. We would maintain 2 turn lanes onto 4th Avenue North and then a dedicated through lane on south on 32nd. But that's really it. We're really being pretty strategic with where those are where we're recommending those turn lanes. We'll have signing and pavement marking upgrades and updates with this project, and then we're also proposing some new bike infrastructure for downtown. So I'm not going to get into every single one of these intersection modifications because we would be here for hours, but this map is basically just to show all the intersections that we do need to do some sort of update at. So the blue circles show existing signals that we would be modifying to accommodate two-way traffic. The only new signal that we're looking at is on Division Street and 2nd Avenue North. We're actually looking at taking out 2 existing signals on North 32nd Street and the 2nd and 3rd Avenue North intersections. Those would be replaced with stop control. And then all other intersections, we'd either maintain the existing stop control that's there or modify the existing signal to accommodate our two-way traffic. So our bike connectivity downtown right now is a little bit lacking. We have a handful of bike lanes leading to downtown, a couple sharrows, but we don't really have anything through our downtown core. So notably, we have bike lanes on 2nd and 3rd Avenue North, east of North 22nd Street. We have a handful of north-south connections as well. So what we're proposing is to continue our 2nd and 3rd Avenue North bike connectivity all the way to Division, and then add 2 north-south connections on North 25th Street and North 31st Street. All right, so from here, we have just the details of what we're looking at for each of these streets. We're gonna start with 3rd Avenue North from Division to North 22nd. So the cross section that we're looking at here is we would have a parallel parking lane on the south side of the road, 2 drive lanes, another parallel parking lane north of those drive lanes, and then north of that parking, we would have a 13-foot area for bikes. And so the way that breaks down is we have a 3-foot striped buffer and then 10 feet to allow 2 directions of bike travel. So we're calling this a 2-direction cycle track. That facility, we're able to keep 10 feet wide for the majority of it, but we have to skinny it up in places where we have space constraints. That 3-foot buffer would at a minimum be striped, but we're also looking at adding like a vertical flexible delineator that helps set the parking so people don't mistake the cycle track for a parking area. That helps with that. And then there's also a protection piece that adds. This cycle track cross-section was really recommended based on the desire for protected bike facility downtown. That was a goal that DBA stated early on in our process. So we were trying to accommodate that with this section on 3rd Avenue North. Just a couple other things to note. The travel lanes are standard, I guess our typical lane for 3rd Avenue North would be 10.5 feet wide. We only get to these 10-foot lanes right out front of Alberta Bear, where the curb is bumped out pretty wide and our street section gets really narrow. We're also able to maintain parallel parking on both sides of the roadway, all the way down 3rd Avenue North, which was really important to us. The one thing to note is that where there is angle parking right now, it'll convert to parallel, which would result in ultimately a parking loss on 3rd Avenue North. And then we have this traffic calming that we're achieving through our 10.5-foot drive lanes, and then just this added friction of 2-way travel, which is consistent through our whole project. Those are kind of the tools that we're using for traffic calming. So with the cycle track, we do have some unique features that we need to incorporate, mainly at intersections. So what we're recommending is to paint the cycle track green through intersections. This alerts both drivers and cyclists to kind of be aware, be on notice, be aware of this potential conflict zone. The other, I guess, conflict area that we've been looking at are where the cycle track crosses alleys and also private drive approaches. We'd expect less traffic on those alleys and private drive approaches, and so we're recommending through those areas just to dash the outside lines and not do the green paint in an effort to kind of minimize our maintenance needs of this green paint. We are still working through these intersection recommendations. So this is kind of what we're seeing as the minimum. These might change a little bit as we work through design. So we have a couple examples from our 30% signing and striping plans. So on the left there, that is where our cycle track, I guess, the west end of our cycle track at Division and 3rd Avenue North. We're recommending a bike box at that end of the cycle track. What that is basically a second stop bar. So the vehicle stops a bit further back from the signal. That allows space for the bikes to come ahead of the vehicle and basically get a head start when you get a green light. That kind of eliminates this awkward merging that you get when you get a green light and you have bike and vehicle both trying to move in the same direction. So this is something our consultant recommended. Again, we're still working through design details, and this is the only one on 3rd Avenue North that we're looking at doing. On the right-hand side, it just shows this green paint through the intersections that we're proposing. Yeah, and again, we're able to maintain parallel parking on both sides of the roadway, and our 3-foot stripe buffer also adds door protection for cyclists. So this is the section of our cycle track where we get pretty narrow out front of Alberta Bear. Our cycle track actually gets down to 7 feet, and then our drive lanes get down to 10 feet, but it's only for half a block. We do have a couple other space-constrained areas, but this is the worst one. But most importantly, we're just working between the existing curb line. We're not trying to modify any curb. We're really trying to accomplish as much as we can with striping and signing. So on to 2nd Avenue North from Division to North 22nd Street. We've taken more of a hybrid approach on this street. So the two bookends, the east and the west ends, we are recommending a buffered bike lane. And that would be basically parallel parking on both sides, bike lane, 1.5-foot buffer, and then our 2 travel lanes. So that would be from Division to North 31st, and then North 25th to North 22nd. What that allows us to do is, then we would move to Sharrows from North 31st Street to North 25th Street. What that allows us to do is maintain the angle parking where it exists today. So the great thing about this hybrid approach is that we don't lose that much parking on 2nd Avenue North. Pretty minimal parking. It'll just be based off of, any sort of site distance things that we need to maintain would be the only parking that we lose. And wherever there's angle parking now is where we're proposing the angle parking to go back. So this is just an example of this buffered bike lane. This is between North 32nd and North 31st. It's pretty typical to other bike lanes we have in town, except for we have this added 1.5-foot buffer between the bike lane and the travel lane. The shows are shared lane markings on 2nd Avenue North, right by Sky Point. It's a little bit hard to tell, but those parking boxes, one of them is wider than the other, and that would be where the angle parking is proposed. So North 31st Street, I'm not going to get too much into this, mostly because the street section is similar to what we're proposing on 3rd Avenue North. So this 2-way cycle track, parallel parking on both sides, and then 2 drive lanes. It's worth noting that there is existing angle parking on North 31st Street, and again, that all would all change to parallel parking. So we would have some parking loss on North 31st Street. And then this provides a north-south protected facility into downtown. This picture here is just an example. This isn't like a rendering of what we're doing, but it's pretty similar to how we would stripe out this cycle track. And you can see those vertical delineators in that striped buffer zone. So on to North 25th Street. We're looking at doing buffered bike lanes on North 25th Street. So that buffered bike lane section where we have parallel parking on both sides, bike lane, 1.5-foot buffer, travel lane. The only exception would be out front of the Met transfer station. There's an existing median there. We would maintain that median, and that just leaves us with the space where we'd have to mark a shared lane marking out front of that Met transfer station. The other change is that we'd be adding an all-way stop control at 2nd Avenue North and North 25th Street. This is to help prioritize the buses leaving that facility. We didn't want to interfere with their operations, and so that's what that 4-way stop is being recommended for. We have coordinated with Met a handful of times, and we've shown them this design. We were able to work through some concerns, and they ultimately were fine with all of this. And then North 25th Street, we identified for bike connectivity because there's an existing bike lane south of the train tracks, and then that is where we're looking at doing the pedestrian bridge, and so it all kind of ties together nicely for bike connectivity. So then that leaves us with our remaining north-south streets. These, we're just recommending angle parking, 2 travel lanes, parallel parking. That fills our 50 feet curb to curb. We gave a little bit more room to the parking to be able to maintain these 11-foot lanes for some traffic calming effects. So the other piece we wanted to talk about is the Montana Avenue Road Diet. We do have it in our consultant's contract to design the Montana Avenue Road Diet. It'll just be constructed with a separate timing. That basically lines up with when MDT does their road maintenance. So Montana Avenue is a National Highway System non-interstate route. So it's MDT's jurisdiction. The road diet was studied in the 2019 downtown traffic study. It was found to be feasible. We have also done a separate traffic memo with our project that confirmed that it's feasible to do this road diet. MDT also conducted a traffic study in 2016 on Montana Avenue. An interesting piece from this figure comes from their traffic study. It basically shows that as you move east, the traffic on that south lane kind of gets smaller and smaller and smaller as you're approaching that lane that turns to a right only to go under the underpass. So that south lane is pretty underutilized as it sits today with its 3 lanes. This project is really about traffic calming on Montana Avenue. Traffic calming has been studied for a while. There's a notable 2004 study that looked at options for traffic calming on Montana Avenue. We did notice there's a speed trailer set up on the east end of Montana Avenue. Just kind of shows that we have some perceived speeding issues on Montana. So our current layout on Montana Avenue, we have 3 lanes of traffic and parallel parking on both sides of the road. What we're proposing are 2 lanes of traffic, parallel parking, and back and angle parking. So the back and angle parking is a requirement from MDT. They have told us if we add any angle parking on Montana Avenue, it has to be back and angle. So that is just an MDT requirement. We do have quite a bit more design and coordination upcoming with MDT to go through the logistics of this project, but their current schedule is to do their road maintenance in the summer of 2027. So this project is further out than our two-way portion of the project. But we are doing the design now to kind of keep up with MDT's schedule. We'll be incorporating the Montana Avenue Road Diet into our public outreach, talking about it at our open house and all of that. So we wanted to make sure that we brought this to you guys today as well. So that leads us to our angle parking discussion. We have back and angle parking on 29th and North 29th and North 30th Street. Again, it's an MDT requirement if we add any angle parking on Montana Avenue for it to be back and angle. So part of the reason we made this change to angle parking on 29th and 30th was in anticipation of the back and angle parking on Montana Avenue. Just want to point out, we do have other areas in town with back and angle parking, notably the eBird. Then there's a couple blocks outside of McKinley Elementary School. So we are recommending back and angle parking for this project where we have angle parking. This is for consistency, but also for safety. There's a handful of safety benefits with the back and angle. It allows a better line of sight for the driver exiting the parking space. It's a better position to load the trunk of your vehicle. And then it also kind of directs you when you get out of your vehicle back to the sidewalk instead of into the street. So there are safety reasons for this back and angle recommendation as well. There we go. Okay, so our project outreach to date, this slide kind of shows what we've done so far. So we have done some pretty extensive general public outreach, notably the alternative prioritization and public preference plan in 2021. That was a full-blown outreach effort that our planning department headed up. We've also conducted some more informal surveys that the DBA has been kind of spearheading. And then we have an open house planned for August 1st in just a couple weeks where we'll be presenting basically these same design ideas. We've done some targeted downtown outreach as well. We presented to the DBA boards. They have a meeting where all three boards gather, so we presented this design to them back in May, I believe. We had a business and property owner open house just last Monday, where we got some feedback from the businesses on within our project area, but also on 29th and 30th. And then we sent out a project letter to all the property owners in the project area plus the block. And so that ended up being over 800 properties that this letter went out to, basically notified of the project, explained the project, and gave them my contact information as well as Mehmet's, and basically asked them to reach out to us if they had any concerns, questions, anything like that. We have coordinated as well with the bike community via TrailNet and then also through BPAC. And then we've been doing internal city coordination, notably with MET, the parking division, planning division, and the street and traffic division. The street and traffic conversations were kind of tied back to that maintenance that I touched on. Are we able to street sweep? Are we able to plow with this cycle track if we add the vertical delineators? They ultimately thought they could make it work. That area is wide enough. It's 10 feet plus the 3-foot buffer that their street sweeper can fit in there, a plow can fit in there. So that was kind of our worry, is if we add some sort of vertical component, we're not gonna be able to maintain our streets. But we were able to talk through that with them, and they thought they could make it work. So we don't have any actions for you tonight, but we will have a couple future council actions. The timing of this project is really tied to our signal equipment lead times. And so in order to keep on track with our next summer construction, we need to order some of that signal equipment early. So we'll have something on a consent agenda, future item for the purchase of some of the signal equipment ahead of bidding. That will be likely in a couple months. We basically need to get our signal design to a point where we feel comfortable making that order. And then we would order that material. And then we would bid the project later in the fall and winter. We have fiscal year 24 funding for this project. Again, we're planning for summer of 2024 to construct the project, but that's really going to depend on that signal equipment lead time schedule. If those lead times change, there's a chance that this project would not be constructed until 2025. But what we're hearing right now is that the lead times are in a window where we're still on track to construct the project next summer. And then again, Montana Avenue Road Diet would be constructed with a future MDT project. So I'm here to answer technical questions. We also have Mehmet, if you have any questions on the two-way piece of it and some of the business piece of it. And then Debbie and Mac are here as well if there's anything I can't answer. So.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for the very thorough report, and welcome to the city. Council, we'll have opportunity for public comment, but here's your opportunity if you've got some especially factual questions for anybody. Councilmember Purinton.
So thank you, Sarah. I'll try to keep it short, Kevin. So my question would be, how much wiggle room does council actually have on any of what you've got planned here?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
How much wiggle room does council have on any of the decisions that you have on these slides? Is it already kind of in stone?
No, so we're at a 30% design level right now. This design is basically based on the recommendations of our consultant. And so any sort of design change, we would want to make sure to vet that fully from a traffic standpoint, from a safety standpoint. But we're not to the point where we can't change anything. We're only to a 30% design.
So follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Sure.
So one of my largest concerns with this, and I'm not the advocate here, but my biggest concern even in the downtown traffic, you have a lot of service vehicles, trailers, people loading up their trailers for shows.
Yep.
Service vehicles, fire trucks, pickups. We have a 1-ton dually, and with the mirrors stuck out, it's like 9 feet.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to see how these 10 to 10.5-foot lanes are going to accommodate that type of traffic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, that's a fair question. So a lot of the like delivery operations, I think are meant to happen from the alley. We know that that doesn't always happen. I see it on Broadway quite often, that a delivery truck is on Broadway, and I mean, people kind of make it work as it is. That's the two-way street right now. So some of that delivery operation stuff will just kind of be part of this two-way function. With that being said, our lanes are mostly 10.5 to 11. It's only 10 feet really in that one little spot. So, I mean, that's a foot difference that we're talking here, but this lane width recommendation came from our consultant. It's fully in our design standards to have those more narrow lanes, and it's really part of what we're trying to accomplish with this project is to discourage people from moving really quickly through downtown. Part of what we want to do is have people slow down, drive a bit safer, be a bit more aware of their surroundings. So those more narrow lane widths will help with that. Yeah. Is there another piece of that I need to answer?
Where's your consultant from?
So Dow and Kittleson are our consultant. Dow's local.
So they're local.
Yeah, they're
Okay.
downtown.
Well, I'm just going to say, I don't agree with that at all, because you got RVs and whatever else, and you're wanting that downtown traffic, and especially if you have retail. So I don't really agree with that, especially when you have that much space for bicyclists. And I don't know if you've got your, some sort of a number of bicyclists that use downtown, and especially during the winter.
Right,
So well, that's it.
yeah.
Okay. I'm sure we'll be interested in statistics. We can't be the only street in the world with 10 or 11-foot lanes. So do those result in side swiping and accidents? You know, presumably there's some data on that issue out there.
Right.
Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. When we build a new subdivision or a planned unit development, we always have a traffic study. So we know how many cars are there. So I'm assuming you've already said how many bicyclists are going to be downtown to spend this amount of money. One bicycle, 500 bicycles.
Right. So
When I come downtown, I don't see any bicycles, so I'm wondering, are you going to build it and then they show up? Is that what the plan is?
So part of the, I guess, issue that we have right now is we don't really have great bike facilities downtown. So it is hard to bike downtown. A lot of our traffic study looked at the function of the vehicles and making sure that what we're doing isn't going to cause too much disruption to, vehicles moving in and out of downtown. But using the space to the best of our ability to accommodate those multimodal activities that were really a goal of this project. So I don't have a number for you to tell you how many bikes we're anticipating come downtown with this new infrastructure. But what I can tell you is that bike infrastructure downtown has been asked for from our bike community. It's a goal that the DBA outlined right from the start. And ultimately our vehicle traffic, isn't affected in a way where it's outside of the levels of how we would want a downtown to operate with this layout that we have.
Go ahead.
So in the future, will you have some mechanism to count the number of people walking on a walkway or a bicycle where we do it for cars currently?
Right.
We need to have some way to say, how do we justify this existence of this program if we don't have enough people or we have too many.
Right. Yeah, and we can always count bikes through that cycle track with those, vehicle tracking devices. So that's something that we can look at doing. Yep.
Thank you. Councilmember Rupsis, Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you, Mayor. Are we considering at all, I've seen in some cities where when pedestrians are waiting at a stoplight, before the light turns, they get like a 3-second head start. I just looked up, it's called a leading pedestrian interval or something like that. Are we going to consider putting those in at all? Because they're supposed to be great for pedestrian safety.
Right, yeah. So we've talked about it as a team. We haven't really made a decision on that. It is a tool that we have in our toolbox, I guess, to look at pedestrian safety. The short answer is we don't have any sort of decision on that, but it's something that's on our radar.
I'd like to encourage you to move forward, at least with the trial in a few places.
Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you. Very exciting. So just to get this in my head, I want to be clear. So this cycle track that you've got on North 31st and then 3rd, the way I'm looking at this map is you could ride down North 31st, go up 3rd, all without ever having to ride in the street. You'd have this protected kind of delineator, so you can get through the entire downtown. Is that right?
Yeah, and so the exceptions are at the intersections, basically, where you would be crossing where vehicles are also moving. So that's why we're kind of focusing on the intersections on how to treat those in the safest way. But yes, so I guess what you do have is at the bookends of the cycle track, you do have to get back onto the streets that doesn't have the cycle track, but that would happen unless it went
anyway. Yeah, okay. No, thank you. I think that's very exciting. I feel like to the comments about it, I would see it not just being for bikes, obviously, you keep saying multimodal, but you'd have moms with strollers. People would use this all the time, I feel like. So just having that protected, I would advocate for some kind of vertical delineator, as you guys are talking about. I think that would make it feel a lot safer.
Sure. We've talked a lot about, or not a lot, a little bit, about a bike share program and also scooter share programs that you see in most large cities. Bike share, obviously, would have access to the bike lanes. Is the assumption that if we had scooter share, that they would also use the bike cycle track?
I don't know the answer to that.
Haven't got there. Okay.
Yeah,
How
I'm not
about
sure
the
on that.
horses in Mamet's slide?
Oh, man.
As long as somebody cleans up afterwards, I guess. Okay. All right. Councilmember Owen?
Thanks, Mayor. I just have a couple questions. And if you can't answer them, it's okay if you want to send someone else. With this project as it's designed, what's the total loss of street parking downtown?
Yeah, so I intentionally didn't include that number because it's going to depend. We don't have it finalized yet. So the way the parking lays out, a lot of it will depend on kind of these site distances that we're looking at, that we're still in the process of looking at. So we don't have a total number of street parking that we're losing. I can say just kind of generally a change from angle to parallel is you're able to retain about 60% of the parking. And so it's, I mean, this was our best. We did look at other options for how to get some bike facilities downtown, and this was honestly our best compromise of, prioritizing bikes in some locations while also maintaining on-street parking everywhere, but also maintaining some angle parking through our downtown core, which we thought was really important.
So I guess I would be interested in understanding some of the bike data too, and I would just add my voice to the concerns that we're investing significant infrastructure for what I think is probably a very small percentage of the population. Because I think what matters here. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, you no, if you want to come up, you come up. I would like to understand specifically commuter bike traffic, right? Because there's, I think, a lot of recreational use on our trails around the community and all that. But I think this is being driven at more of a commuter demographic, people who are getting to work downtown. There'll be some recreational use, right? You want to ride downtown for the Strawberry Festival or whatever, like, I get that. But I think what we're talking about here is predominantly a commuter, which I think is a very small portion of the community.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to understand some of that demand.
Okay.
I get that the DBA wants that, but I want to understand the community demand for it. I'd also like to understand, if you don't know off the top of your head, you mentioned that you had worked out maintenance ability.
Yes.
But you didn't share with us maintenance costs. So I'd like to understand the increased cost of maintaining as proposed.
Yeah, okay.
Debbie can send that in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there something else, Debbie, that you wanted to chime in?
So a little bit to Councilmember Parrington's question, then to yours as well. What does the council have to participate in this? 30% is what we're bringing you, but what we have is a complete streets policy that has been approved by this council, and that is our direction. So when we have policies in place, that's what we try to design to. So in this case, we look at our downtown, it's very not multimodal, it's not complete streets. So if the council wants complete streets, then we should continue down these paths. If you want us to shift that, then we need to know that as well. So that's where we look for that direction, because that's what we're designing to. So.
Thank you. Councilmember Tricky?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have a question. I just wanted to make a comment that 120 years ago, or 100 years ago, when that picture was taken of Broadway with the horses and the trains and all that kind of stuff, there would have been resistance to changing it to much more paved roads and getting rid of the trains, for that matter. I mean, these things, it is. I mean, we see change as the technology that people use changes, and that's exactly what we're experiencing here. And if we want a downtown with lots of people living and shopping and working there, we have to have multimodal means of moving around in that downtown area, and having just building it just for cars so that cars can go through there quickly is exactly what we do not want, what people living in downtown areas do not want. So if we want to keep people out of living from downtown, then by all means, let's keep the one-way streets and not put any room in there for pedestrians or bikes or anything like that, and just let people zoom from the Heights to the West End. We don't need a downtown.
Okay, with that, why don't we open it up for public, was there other?
I just wanted to follow up with what Debbie said.
Okay, Councilmember Parrington?
So Debbie, on the complete street policy, are there options within the complete street policy that would be different, say, on 31st Street and maybe, I'll just say 24th Street? I know that's a stretch, but are there different ways that you look at a complete street policy depending on where it is, where it's located?
Absolutely. So the complete streets policy is very wide open. It leaves a lot of the interpretation, a lot of the implementation to the staff. So you'll see there isn't a bike lane on every street. It was very intentional. It was very much looking at a from-to scenario where we can make sure that people can access. So the complete street policy speaks more to a concept as a whole. It doesn't define how we accomplish it.
And follow up, Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
So one of the things, because what you're doing with the downtown, and I do disagree with Councilmember Shariki, because you have people accessing the interstate through 27th, downtown, for the Heights, wherever. So it is primarily a vehicle-driven community. The other thing is, in Missoula and Bozeman both, if I remember right, in their downtown, Missoula only has 2 lanes. Bozeman has 4 lanes in their downtown when you go through, I guess that's Main Street. And there's no left turn signals, I think, in either one of those communities. How will this, with the traffic that they're wanting, because there's still going to be vehicle traffic primarily, how will that justify moving that traffic? Whether it's slow or fast, it's still going to, I think, add some congestion in the downtown, especially whenever there's a train going by, whenever you're 5 o'clock traffic, your major travel times. So kind of tell me how you foresee that.
So I'm going to let Sarah take the question of exactly how they evaluated those intersections. But she did address on that one slide, everything's a balancing act, so congestion versus traffic calming. We don't want to make it so miserable to drive downtown that you're never going to come downtown, but we also don't want to have high speeds and just cars. So it's that balance, but she can talk about how they looked at those intersections.
So when we did the update to the 2019 downtown traffic study, we got some additional traffic counts and traffic data, and then basically updated what the 2019 study looked at. And so when I say that the findings are that the traffic will operate in acceptable levels for urban settings, that means that we are expecting additional delays at the intersections, but it's not in such a way that it's going to make the downtown not operate smoothly. So our intersection delays kind of range depending on which intersection we're looking at. It's basically like a 1 to 5 second intersection delay that we would expect with this two-way change. So that's just a model that our consultant has put together and looks at and analyzes.
Final question.
Okay,
Who
final
yields?
question,
The
and we'll open
car?
up for public comment.
Who yields, the car or the bicyclist on those turns?
Let's see here. I believe, I should know that, but I believe the car yields to the bicycle. I believe.
Okay. All right, thank you. This is a public hearing, or at least opportunity for public comment. So you've heard the discussion, and if you'd like to comment, please come forward. Just ask that you tell us your name and your address. And keep your comments to 3 minutes. Or less. You're not required to use all 3 minutes.
I can do my best. Marguerite Jodry, 414 South 33rd Street, and I am also a downtown business owner with Zest Kitchen and Cookware on North 29th Street. Mayor and Council, you've already received a couple of emails from me supporting the two-way conversion. We opened in 2020 as a one-way. The conversion happened in 2021, so I don't have a ton of data to fall back on. But I can say that traffic moves a lot slower, that it's easier to give people directions to our store, and that our street just feels more like a destination and less like a thoroughfare. In 1975, a decision was made to try to move people through downtown as quickly as possible. Maybe at that time they were not viewing downtown as a destination, but that does not reflect the vibrancy of our downtown community at this time. We are a destination, and those of us who are in the downtown TIF district, paying taxes in the downtown TIF district, want to be able to use that money for an infrastructure project, as we are constantly hearing from council that TIF monies should be prioritized for infrastructure. We want to do an infrastructure project that directly reflects our status as a vibrant destination in the Billings community, and we ask that council please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, I'm Sarah Keller, and I live at 3333 Laredo Place. I'm speaking as a citizen tonight. And I am a big advocate of the protected bike lanes in the proposed plan, as it is consistent with the city's complete streets policy adopted in 2011 and renewed in 2019, and also our 2017 bikeway and trails master plan that was updated in 2018. I think building on the last comment, there's lots of evidence that communities that have added protected bike lanes with two-way conversions have increased retail sales in their downtown areas by 7% on Salt Lake's Broadway. 59% of business owners on the street said they supported them, and only 18% opposed after the protected bike lanes were added. Also in Memphis, Tennessee, Broad Avenue revenues shot up 30% after they added protected bike lanes. Customers who arrive at retail stores by bike or on foot or on other pedestrian means are more likely to shop, and they spend the same per month as people who arrive by car, but they tend to make smaller purchases more frequently. Also, as was discussed, adding protected bike lanes will remove very few on-street parking spaces, max 30 to 40%. Our proposal advocates for using parallel parking on some of the streets instead of back in to take up less space, and on the streets that have narrower streets such as 2nd Avenue North and 3rd Avenue North, which each have 50 feet dedicated to asphalt, bike lanes can be added while still having on-street parking for businesses. So I urge you to go forward with this great design that your city engineers have come up with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Henry J. Kaczynski, and I'm speaking to you today as a high school student here in Billings. My address is 580 58th Street West. I'm strongly in favor of the city adding protected bicycle lanes downtown. Just to talk about this project specifically, this project gives the city the highest return on investment of almost any bicycle infrastructure project that the city has considered before. To understand why that is, we kind of have to look at some other bicycle projects that the city has done. So the city has a complete streets policy and has been making progress at adding bicycle infrastructure as the city expands and as new development occurs. The multi-use paths on Shiloh and elsewhere on the West End are a few examples. These projects exist primarily in low-density areas, and they do see decent use. The protected bike lanes downtown would almost certainly see even better use. That's because downtown, of course, has a higher density of housing, offices, and retail. And so by the nature that there are more people living in a smaller area, you're going to see more use. And many people already bike downtown, but for many more, biking downtown is uncomfortable. And many people are uncomfortable for a good reason. Biking downtown mixed in with vehicle traffic is dangerous, oftentimes. Adding protected bicycle lanes gives people riding bikes a much greater degree of safety and thus comfort. And again, when people feel safe biking, they are much more likely to bike. Protected bike lanes make biking more comfortable for a great variety of people, especially across age groups. Kids, for example, are much likelier to use the multi-use paths we see, for example, on the West End, than, say, the conventional bike lane that's on Rimrock as you get closer to MSUB, or the Sharrow you see on Lewis. That's because you're riding so much closer to vehicles, right? And nobody feels, especially kids, they're not going to feel comfortable biking next to like a 2-ton metal box, right? That's what a car is, right? When we're talking about vehicles moving at 25 to 30 miles per hour, that's to say nothing of their parents, who are also probably worried about their safety. Downtown bike lanes are already in the city's policy. They're in the bikeway trails and master plan. They're in the city's complete streets policy. They're in the long-range transportation plans that the city has approved back in 2018 and that the city has just seen developed in 2023. To address just a few last points, to talk about biking downtown, I've heard the phrase used like cyclists or the bicycling, like the biking community. And I just like to say, some people are really cycling enthusiasts, but there are a great number of people who bike downtown, or who bike for transportation purposes, just when it's the practical thing to do. And so people aren't just cyclists, they're not just in the cycling community. People drive sometimes, they bike sometimes, they walk sometimes. We don't talk about a driving community per se. We recognize that people move around our city in different ways and in different means when appropriate. And so yes, I think part of this plan is to hopefully see more people biking for transportation purposes, to work, to school, to retail places. And again, I would urge council to support this plan as proposed as far as biking infrastructure.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, Mayor and Council. My name is Christy Drake. I'm at 2950 Walden Place, and I am a Ward 4 resident. And I am speaking today on behalf of the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, which is your advisory committee on all things bike and pedestrian related. I have taken off the Billings Trail Net hat, so pretend like I'm not wearing that one. we have been, we had our presentation, or the presentation from Sarah and Debbie Melling a couple of weeks ago, and our entire committee was we felt very favorably toward this proposal, because it will help bicyclists and pedestrians be a lot safer. Protected bike lanes really help organize the roadway to be safer and clearer and easier for everyone. Without protected bike lanes, bicyclists need to stay as far to the right as possible. And as you all know, we're used to that. But, and so bicyclists often will either ride on the sidewalk downtown. I'm sure you've seen bicyclists riding on the sidewalk. That's, of course, illegal in business districts. And so having a protected bike lane will show them exactly where they need to be. Or they'll ride as close to the curb as they can, which is what we're supposed to do, but then they have to weave in between parked cars when there are parallel parked cars, and that makes them unpredictable, so they're darting in and out of traffic. This results in unpredictable behavior, and that's why these protected bike lanes are so important. I also was riding the trails the other day, and I ran across a woman who was in a wheelchair, and she was telling me that she doesn't like to ride on the sidewalks. She actually likes to ride in bike lanes because the traffic knows where she is. When she's riding on sidewalks, she's going up and down the curb approaches, and then cars just come out of driveways and don't see her. And she's a little person in this wheelchair. So that's another important thing. Protected bike lanes safeguard drivers from being surprised by unpredictable behaviors. They ensure bicyclists use lanes rather than sidewalks. They make bicyclists safer and more comfortable when they have a clearly defined place to ride. And I would say also that bike boxes, if there truly is very few people riding bicycles, those bike boxes shouldn't be a problem for people wanting to drive and having to yield to bicyclists. The very few people, if there are very few people riding bicycles in the downtown, if they're in a bike box, then it shouldn't be too much of a problem. I usually, when I'm riding down 3rd and I have to go onto Division, people are always very kind, and they usually wait for me to cross. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Dan Brooks with the Billings Chamber at 815 South 27th Street. Just wanted to come and voice our support for the two-way conversion and echo some of the comments that you've heard already about the benefits to businesses and safety. But really, I heard SEPTED and thought, gosh, I can't pass up the opportunity to talk about some SEPTED stuff. So Mehmet was correct in his comments earlier about the importance in the National Institute of Crime Prevention's curriculum for their basic 5-day, 40-hour SEPTED course. They have an entire chapter of their basic handbook dedicated to traffic calming, which includes a number of various ways moving to two-way streets so you can create some friction between drivers, using chicanes and or speed tables, and a number of other things that I'm sure Debbie could list off dozens of them that we could potentially implement to slow that traffic down and increase natural surveillance on the streets. The last thing I'll mention is that as we've gone out and done our SEPTED evaluations of properties in Billings, we do happen to notice, and I can't tell you the statistics on it, we're not exactly measuring it, but there does seem to be a similarity between one-way streets and walls that get tagged, right? As we're driving down, say, First Avenue and or Montana Avenue, that side of the building that doesn't have that natural surveillance of drivers oftentimes will get tagged and tagged again and again, even if our business owners go and clean that up. So just want to keep that in consideration as you're thinking about the SEPTED benefits of the two-way streets, offer up our support, and kind of end with, I think Mehmet had it on the slide there, promoting moving people to a space rather than moving people through a space when it comes to our downtown. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
My name is Earl Herman with Western Office Equipment, and we've been on North 32nd Street since about 1954, 1955. So we've watched a lot of the demographics change from 4th Avenue, 6th Avenue, et cetera. Houses change into business to nothing. And first, I might add, the DBA has been most gracious in listening to some possible solutions. My reference as far as the bicycles and all the other two-way streets, I have no concern with, to do whatever you feel is best. My concern is North 32nd Street. North 32nd Street exists from 6th Avenue, which is now blocked off and goes no further than 6th and Grand, and down to First Avenue. On North 32nd Street, all 5 of the businesses from 4th to 6th do not want two-way traffic. And there's 2 businesses from 4th Avenue down to First Avenue, KTVQ and the Granite Building. Every one of the companies that I've mentioned has no parking on the left-hand side of the street. There is no businesses on the east side of that business. Every one of the businesses have designed their parking to be the right-hand side, the west side of the street. So there's no reason to have a northbound lane on North 32nd. North 32nd Street is to move traffic safely, and that's what I want to address. We just need to get traffic, because the left-hand lane when you're on North 32nd Street is to serve the medical corridor, Lincoln Center, library, North 27th, and the airport. The 2 center lanes are to get traffic through town and out to the Heights and out to the metro area. The right-hand lane is to serve the city and get people downtown. So the problem that we need to do is to move traffic and safely. The biggest problem that we have right now is people can travel from 6th Avenue to 4th Avenue for 2 blocks without any obstructions between there. About monthly, we end up with 1 person getting hit crosswalking at the YMCA. Multiple solutions have been tried and none have worked. They've chained the street, tried to direct them. When the YMCA moved their entrance from the corner of 4th Avenue and North 32nd Street to the middle of the street, that designed a problem, and they went, oh, look what we've created. And anyway, I've talked with them about several things. What you need to do to get traffic across the street, jaywalking is going to happen. Even though you didn't see it in the 1914 picture on the screen, jaywalking is going to happen. And any of you, including members that are around here, have jaywalked across that street if you've been to the YMCA. So if you've ever traveled on the, I believe it's 27th Street West, going from Broadwater to Central Avenue, there's a little school there, little Metal Arc School. When you turn there, they have raised walkways across there for the kids to get across from the residential to the school. They also have a raised walkway where you can get from residential to that park. That speed bump or slightly raised area slows traffic, and it's unequivocal. It will slow you down after the first time you hit it if you didn't see it. The other thing that slows traffic down are rental streets. You know you're coming into a situation. I've just noticed that instead of building these bump outs that you've created on 6th Avenue to get across over to North Park and several, that's expensive. But look what you've done at North Park. You've created these pole bump outs, and we're trying those at North Park. That gives the people from either side of the street the ability to move out through where parked cars are and visually see the direction. The YMCA is concerned now they're going to start losing people both directions rather than one direction right now.
Earl, I'm just going to ask you to wrap up because your time was up a while ago.
Okay, if you put a bump out, they've been gracious. We're going to discuss a real on-site visit and see what's going on Friday. So we can look at that, but I just want the North 32nd to be a big concern to you guys. Okay?
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. My name's Morgan Tuss. I live at 2837 US Highway 3, and I am a board member for Billings TrailNet here, so that's my mode for talking to you today. As you know, Billings TrailNet is a 501c3 grassroots nonprofit, and our mission is to promote a complete community-wide trail system in Billings. Implementing protected bike lanes is congruent with the following goals in the two-way restoration project that Mehmet Casey just introduced. Improving livability, stimulating economic growth, promoting safety, better access to downtown, increase multimodal connectivity. There were a couple comments that came up, understandably so, about the use of bike lanes and who would use them and how many people use them. And while I can't speak to those exact numbers, I can say that Billings TrailNet has over 1,300 individual, group, and corporate members here in Billings who support the mission and goals of increasing non-motorized connectivity in Billings and who are looking to the city to improve multimodal pathways, which include protected bike lanes. So for those reasons, I'd just like to say that Billings TrailNet strongly supports the inclusion of protected bike lanes in the two-way conversion. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Is there any other public comment? Okay, and please, if you'd like to comment, just go ahead and stand up and make a little line there.
Hi, my name is Sherry Daly. I live at 108 Wyoming Avenue, and I have a business downtown, Montana Vintage Clothing on North 29th. I have been in business for 25 years, first on Montana Avenue dealing with one-ways there, then on 29th dealing with one-ways there. I actually came mostly just in support of the two-way traffic, but as I listened to the whole project, I really want to advocate the bicycle routes. No one's even talked about the amount of development that's going to be taking place downtown with numerous high-rises, apartments that are being built. And you know that with that, and you've got working young adults, that there'll be more bicycles downtown when that happens. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration too. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment on this item? No one is online, no one's coming forward, so we'll close the public comment period. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. Council, it's 7. We can call this a wrap, move on to item number 2, if there is nothing else from you. Councilmember Boyette, Councilmember Gulick, and Shaw. So Councilmember, I'm sorry, Joy, but we'll start with Councilmember Boyette, Gulick, and Joy.
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, do you have a minute? The gentleman talked about North 32nd, which I've been on a million times, I guess. There's no businesses on the east side. Did you listen to his comment about he'd like to keep that a one-way versus a two-way? Do you have any comment about that?
I'm going to let the project team answer that. But you have to look more at corridors. You have to look more at the whole area versus just one street at a time. So I'd caution that, and then I'm sure they looked at it to see how that would work as a whole.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to his, he has a business there and he says there's no businesses on the left side of the street or east side, so why have it?
Right. Yeah, so we mostly were looking for from a consistency standpoint, if we leave that one little section as a two-way, it's maybe adds some confusion. It does add a nice connection to Grand Avenue from downtown, which is a little tricky to get onto as of right now. And then another thing to note is that we are maintaining those 2 lanes on to 4th. And so right now there are 2 lanes that go on to 4th, where you can make the left-hand turn on from North 32nd to 4th Avenue. We would maintain those and then add a 3rd through lane. So the intent would be to maintain the traffic flows off of Grand Avenue onto 4th Avenue North. But Earl mentioned we're going to go meet on site on Friday and kind of talk through some of the operations of that intersection. And yeah, we are looking at it though. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Gulick?
Yes, several council members just asked, it's true that you don't see a lot of bicyclists downtown. And so why don't we, are we providing a lot of infrastructure for that's not going to be used, which is not an unreasonable question, but if you imagine downtown is surrounded by a big wall, sort of like a Berlin Wall-like thing, you probably wouldn't see many people driving downtown. For bicyclists right now, that situation, it's very analogous because very few bicyclists are comfortable riding on a lane. There are no bike lanes there, so they would be riding in traffic. That's why you don't see bicycles downtown right now. Furthermore, I think when you have bike lanes downtown, this is the biggest concentration of jobs and services in the town. Suddenly the whole bike network throughout the city becomes much more viable too, because you have destinations that people want to go to. Like right now, having lanes that don't really go to places that people want to go there's not a reason to bike on it. But when you have a downtown that's bikeable, suddenly the whole network has a lot more reason to exist, and you will see a much greater, many more bicyclists. And that's enough for now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I will be sending out an article to council members and I think a couple of members of the public who expressed sort of an interest. It's called Foot Traffic Ahead, and it is a study of 35 metropolitan areas around the United States and what walkability does in terms of property values, economic return on investment in the sense that economic activities that take place in that urban area. So for a very small piece of urban area, you have tremendous economic impact. And so some of those numbers for 35 of the top metropolitan areas of the United States, they used 2.6% of the land. They contribute 49.8% of the population, but they contribute I believe it's 19.5% of the real GDP for the United States. So there's an intersection that happens in an urban area that is very different than what happens in a lower density suburban type development. And I'll send that to council, and so you can take a look at that. But it is a tremendous economic benefit to having walkable, urbanized areas, and I think that's what a thriving downtown really looks like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Council, anything further before we move on to item 2, family violence education? I'm not seeing anybody waving frantically, so thank you, members of the public who came, and thank you for the presentation. Very valuable. With that, then we will move on to item number 2, our discussion of family violence education and family justice centers more generally, I imagine, or less generally, more specifically. And please silence your cell phone. There are some very inconsiderate people out there who did not get the memo. Actually, it was from Royce.
I noticed.
He's taking care of his mom's house.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having me here. The city administrator had asked me to come and give an update on family violence here in the Billings area, and also a quick update on the Family Justice Center. And so I have Ellie with AmeriCorps Vista here. She'll give an update at the end. Councilmember Shaw had attended the last Citizen Police Academy and listened to my domestic violence presentation, and she had asked me to come and present that information here to council. That is a 90-minute presentation, so I've done my very best to condense it to not 90 minutes, but we're going to try to move fast, go through some of these things quickly. I'm going to try to stay away from statistics, not focus on statistics, because I think you guys get beat over the head with numbers. I also think it's unfair to give you numbers, just crime stats, and expect you to make decisions without giving you the context. What does 900 domestic violence cases for the Billings Police Department, what does that look like? What does it entail? Because there's a lot more to it than the assault, police response, an arrest, and the defendant's day in court, right? There's a lot more to it than that.
And Katie, although we all know you, people
I'm
listening
sorry.
do not. So would you just sort of introduce yourself?
Definitely. I'm Katie Nash. I'm one of the domestic violence investigators with the Billings Police Department. I've been with the police department for 17 years, and I've been the domestic violence investigator for a little over 10 years. So that's where I'm getting this information, is from my history in that position. So sorry about that.
Great.
Okay, so find my cursor. So just to give a quick disclaimer and to give you some statistics, nationally, 41% of women and 26% of men will be the victim of some kind of intimate partner violence. I tell you that to explain why I use she, her when I'm talking about victims in this presentation. That's not to take away from the fact that men can also be victims of domestic violence and intimate partner violence. Statistically, women are more likely. So for the ease of communication, I'm going to use she and her when talking about victims. That is just the way it is. I know there are people and organizations who have specific definitions when it comes to victims versus survivors. If you prefer the term survivor as opposed to victims, I see you, I respect that. I've been in the police department, like I said, for a lot of years. This is what our report writing system looks like. I don't have an option to pick survivor. I have an option to pick suspect and victim. So out of 17 years of muscle memory, I refer to the victims as victims. I think it's also important to note that not all victims make it to survivor status. So if you want to insert the term survivor when I say victim, feel free to. So what are we talking about when we talk about domestic violence? Most people go to an assault, right? It's some kind of physical altercation, physical assault. Partner family member assaults is the state statute. There are misdemeanors and felonies. There's also strangulation within the past few years. That's a standalone felony. You guys have seen that. You've seen these crime maps. These are City of Billings maps. You can see from the colors and the dots on here that domestic violence incidents happen all over the city. Officers also work with a number of other statutes that are domestic violence adjacent. They happen in intimate partner violent relationships. And that's sexual assault, sexual intercourse without consent. Layman term for that is rape. For people who might need to hear it, raping your spouse is illegal. Protective order violations are often domestic violence related. No contact order violations, witness tampering. That's a lot of what I investigate, as well as stalking. So those are all related to domestic violence, not necessarily covered in the statistics that you guys hear about from the police department. The issue with domestic violence is that a lot of the behavior to gain power and control is not illegal. I provided this handout to council, and you can see around this, the spokes around this wheel show all the different forms of domestic violence, and that includes, again, non-criminal acts, things that from the outside don't look like they're a big deal. We won't go through them all. It's one thing to see them on paper, it's another thing to actually hear what they are in real life. So these are actual jail calls. When a suspect is arrested, they go to jail, they start making phone calls. A lot of times the phone calls are to their victims, which is a crime. So these are real examples from our Billings jail, our Billings suspects, just to show you kind of how the power and control wheel plays out in real life.
I'm not worried about the Jeep. I just want to get the vet, sell the bike, and take you back to Texas with me.
So some of the audio might be a little hard to hear. He's just telling his victim that he wants to sell the things, get some money, and move back to Texas. For some background, he's from Texas, his family is from Texas. The victim is from here. Her friends, her job are here in Billings. So if she moves with him to Texas, he is stripping her of her support system. That is isolation. That's what isolation looks like. That's what it sounds like.
She didn't think she would make you that jealous. But I just said all that means is that he cares about you. They don't want nobody else around us. They're spies.
Okay, a little bit muffled. This is a defendant speaking with his own father. The father had been in contact with the victim. So dad is relaying what he told the victim. The suspect was arrested for assaulting another man and the victim at a bar because the victim had the audacity to speak to another male. So dad is just relaying that he assured the victim that he knows she didn't know that talking to that man was going to make him jealous. The suspect can't really help himself because she's his prize. And so he's trying to protect his prize. That's what ownership and male privilege sounds like. I'm going to skip this one because it's difficult to hear.
Where are you?
I'm not going to tell you where I am.
You better not be at the courthouse.
I'm not.
Where are you?
Jason, I'm hanging up now.
You either tell me or when I find you, it's going to be twice as bad.
So I don't know what twice as bad means. The victim knows. That's what threats and intimidation sound like.
Where are you?
I'm not going to tell you where I am.
What does a typical victim look like when you just picture a domestic violence victim? I think a lot of people kind of default to this, kind of a meek-looking woman. Visible injuries, right? We like to think that there's some visible injuries, signs of an assault. It could look like this. And if you don't recognize this, that woman is Gabby Petito. She was the young woman that she was missing for quite a while. Authorities found her body. This looks like a happy couple. She was an independent young lady, from all outside appearances, happy in her relationship, until he strangled her and left her body in the wilderness and then killed himself. Nobody goes from zero to strangler without anything in between. So there was definitely domestic violence in that relationship. So that is what domestic violence looks like also. Hard to pick out. Domestic violence offenders, we're talking about people in our community, your neighbors, my neighbors, right? These are clips from Gazette articles, cases that I have worked on. This guy broke his girlfriend's orbital socket. He had to write the phrase, "Boys don't hit girls," 8,000 times. I don't think he did that. This man threatened his ex-wife and her new partner with a rifle in a parking lot. This man was the one who said, "If you don't tell me, it will be twice as bad." This doctor pled not guilty to this investigation. What about this guy? Man convicted for prostituting girlfriend to raise bail money, arrested on a warrant. What he was telling her was, "I love you, baby. Do what you need to do to get me out of jail." Later, they discussed a code so that she could describe the sex acts she was earning money for to get him out of jail. The best we could do, that was back in 2012, 2013, the best we could do was promoting prostitution. So he was convicted of promoting prostitution. Right now, I would say he's potentially a human trafficker, right? He's trying to get his girlfriend to sell her body so that he can benefit financially. Human trafficking. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the nexus between domestic violence and human trafficking, as you could just see, is pretty evident. The trauma that victims have to live through and the power and control tactics that abusers use are very similar in both domestic violence and human trafficking. The effects of the trauma are similar in both categories as well. So we're just going to talk about some of the commonalities in victims for both categories, human trafficking and domestic violence. There's no strict demographic characteristics. They are majority of victims are female. They live in isolation from friends and family, just like the guy that wanted to bring his girlfriend to Texas to isolate her. You'll see signs of physical injury, and it won't be one injury. It'll be multiple injuries that happened over a period of time. If you ask, you might get an inconsistent account that just doesn't make sense with the injury that you're seeing. The account of how that happened doesn't make sense. Victims tend not to be in possession of their own ID. That's a control tactic. It's one thing for my husband to hold my purse for a minute, right? But if he maintains control over my driver's license, my passport, that's a problem. There's no reason that an adult shouldn't be in possession of their own identification. Victims become fearful and anxious. You can feel it when they're in the room. They're not allowed to talk for themselves. The victim is worried about what she's saying and if the offender will hear it. The offender is worried about staying in earshot so that he knows what she's saying, and he might jump in and answer questions for the victim. That's why officers separate the parties before we interview people on scene, because we don't want her to worry about what he's hearing, and we don't want him to hear what she is saying. We don't want there to be intimidation on scene. Victims display medical and mental health problems because of the stress that they're under. You'll see anxiety and depression, which can lead to self-harm, being suicidal, or self-medicating. Domestic violence can look like this. This woman is alive. This was a welfare check call at a local motel. Do you see all the needles on the bed? She's not diabetic. So this is potentially self-medication happening. I know that this woman, the subject of this welfare check, was on my caseload as a victim repeatedly. So to me, that looks like she's trying to self-medicate to ease the trauma that she's been through. So domestic violence can look like that. I know you guys have gone through, heard all about ACEs, so I'm not going to go into the details. You know that children witnessing domestic violence in their household scores among the adverse childhood experiences. Again, it's one thing to hear that, to see it on paper. It's another thing to actually hear what the children are going through. These are difficult to hear, so fair warning, I apologize, they are not easy. God bless the 911 call takers, right, that have to listen to that. That was a San Diego 911 center. As you heard, the child was 6 or 7 years old. Don't think that the city of Billings is immune from crimes like that.
Billings 911. My dad and mom are fighting and I'm really scared. What address are you at? What address are you at? What is your address? I don't know.
So it's difficult to hear because of kind of the background noise. What I could hear is a male in the background say something about call 911, and then you hear, I'll remember that. I don't know what that means. The victim knows what that means. This is edited. The dispatcher was able to get the address so that he could send officers to the right place. The 911 call continues after mom gets on the phone.
And you and your husband were fighting? Yeah. There's no fighting going on anymore. He left. But we're okay. Please don't send anybody here. That's not an option.
So she went from screaming, call 911, to the point that her voice is hoarse. Minutes later, no, we're okay. Please don't send anybody here. Who doesn't she want there? Police. She doesn't want the police there. Unfortunately, that is something that happens frequently, whether it's within one 911 call or months down the line. Victims choose not to participate. They don't want to participate in the case. They don't want to speak to officers. It's not uncommon. It is unfortunate. That becomes part of my job as the domestic violence investigator. This was a text that I got, a little hard to see, from a victim who texting me just frantically, text after text. And at that point, the city had given me just a phone where you have to press a button 3 times to get the letter C. So I was trying to respond back to her, and she's just blowing up my phone. He's going to kill me. When he gets out of jail, he will kill me. She knew that when that man got out of jail, he would hunt her down and kill her. I met with her for several hours, was able to charge him with multiple additional felonies, and months later, as the case was getting ready to go to trial, I got this text message. I want the charges dropped, please, and thank you. This is a written recant statement. That's what we call them, as recant statements, when victims alter their stories to try and get the charges dropped. I didn't tell the whole truth in my last statement. I was just angry at my boyfriend. And here's a typed one. The statements I have made concerning this cannot be considered accurate, even though I did not intend to or realize that I was giving inaccurate information at the time. That tells me that someone may have told her that what she told officers was inaccurate, and that makes me want to start a witness tampering investigation. These are very frustrating to officers, to have victims who clearly are living through horrendous trauma suddenly decide that they don't want to participate. It makes us want to ask, if you don't want help, what do you want? If you don't want help, even friends and family members go through this. If you don't want help, stop calling me. But what do they want? It's not quite a fair question until we really define what help is. So to me, and to patrol officers, to the officers sitting in the back of the room, help means we're going to get into that house. We're going to stop the assault. We're going to remove him from the home, lock him up. We're going to get her someplace safe. We're going to make sure that he doesn't contact her again, and she's going to live a safe, happy life. No more domestic violence. That's what I want to do to help. That's what help means to me. So it's difficult when victims don't want my help, because to me it makes total sense. What help means for the victim is, I want the assault to stop right now. I want the punching to stop, the strangulation to stop in this moment. When that stops, when he leaves, that's done. It's done. The help has arrived and it's over. Who's right? I don't have an answer to that. So it's definitely not as easy as just leave. And the reason is that when we ask victims to just leave, they're putting themselves at risk. They have barriers to leaving, right? I wish that I could take credit for the next set of slides. I heard it at a presentation. The presenter said that she had plagiarized it from another presentation, and so feel free to plagiarize from her, so I did. So, someone smarter than me broke down risks and barriers to leaving into 3 categories. So we have abuser-generated risk, life-generated risk, and system-generated risk. Abuser-generated risk, you can look right at that power and control wheel to see it's the threats, intimidation, physical violence, the isolation like we talked about. As many as 50% of DV victims are threatened for cooperating. And when a victim leaves, and in the months after leaving, they're at an increased risk of death or serious bodily injury from that suspect. Domestic violence is about power and control. When a victim leaves, the abuser has lost power and control, and they react. That's abuser-generated risk. Life-generated is embarrassment for calling the police, having the cops show up at your door. Or maybe your culture is that women are subservient to men, or your culture is we don't call the cops. Our victims are not perfect. They have substance abuse issues, mental health issues. They have warrants. They're not going to want to talk to me. Also, if I went from a 2-income household to a 1-income household, I would have a problem. If my husband goes to jail, who's going to pay my rent? Who's going to watch my son? Those are life-generated risks. System-generated risk, that means the police, the courts. The system is not a victim-friendly place, and I'll show you some examples of why. I know that you guys have seen this before as well. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like a stair step, right? You need to get past the first step. You need air and water before you can work on the steps above, like developing healthy friendships and healthy relationships. If you can't get past step 1, you cannot worry about step 2, 3, 4, and 5. Just like I've been saying with other things, it's one thing to see it on paper, it's another thing to actually hear it happening. So this is an actual case from the Billings area. I'll just read through the allegations within the police report. Victim and defendant were involved in a physical altercation. The defendant raised his fist back as if he was going to hit her. So that's partner family member assault, reasonable apprehension. That's a crime. She locked herself in a room. He punched through the door. She got hit with part of the door. He took and then tried to break her phone when she threatened to call 911. That's criminal destruction of a communication device. That's crime number 2. When she tried to leave, he pinned her against the wall and smashed her head against the wall. That is also a partner family member assault, so crime number 3. Officers arrested him. He appeared in front of the court the next business day or whenever the next court date was. The victim asked to address the court at his arraignment, which is her right.
I wanted to be able to ask for the no contact order to be dropped because
There's noise from the jail in the background, I apologize.
Because of my child, and he is, like, he does help us financially. And so I need him to be able to have contact with me so I can figure out the bills with him and be able to figure this out with him.
So you said your child, is it his child?
No, it's his stepchild.
Okay.
But I've been living with him and his mom. And last night when the cops got called, I had talked to the cops, and I tried to get a hold of the witness advocate because I'm trying to drop the charges and be able to drop the no contact because I need the no contact to be dropped so we can have contact and figure it out. I'm not asking for us to live together. I'm just asking the courts be able to give us contact so I can figure out all the financial.
I'm going to keep the no contact order in place. Purposes of that, the allegations in this matter are very serious, and the purpose of the no contact order is to maintain the integrity of the case and also to protect you.
So the background noise covered over what she said. What she said after the judge said the no contact order will stay in place was, I don't need protection. The judge appropriately kept the no contact order in place. She didn't want it there. Again, typical victim. But when you compare it to this hierarchy of needs, what I heard her say was she and her son, who is not the defendant's son, are living with him and his mother. So there's no blood relation. She's worried that she and her child no longer have a place to live. She needs his help with the bills, which tells me there might be some financial insecurity. If there's financial insecurity, there might be food insecurity. So this woman, clearly having a really bad day, and now she's worried about shelter and food for herself and her son. When she tells the judge, I don't need protection, that's step 2. This woman can't even get past step 1 in this hierarchy. And we're expecting her to worry about step 2, her own safety. She can't get there right now. That's what that hierarchy of needs sounds like. After she says that she doesn't need protection, unfortunately, the judge responded with, well then, you shouldn't have made a statement to law enforcement saying all the things you said. I haven't looked into it, but my bet is that she has not called the police again, which is unfortunate. Here is example number 2 of system-generated risk. This is a fictitious victim, just to illustrate the system. It's a training video. We're not going to watch the video. I pulled some screenshots out of it just to illustrate the point. The story of Rachel, this walks through her walk after she calls 911. Her husband was abusive. She ended up calling the police to make the assault stop and kind of got herself into this nightmare of a system. I'm going to spoil it for you and tell you that it ends like this. Rachel has become increasingly uncooperative, so keep that ending in mind as we walk through the steps. So step 1 is triggered by her 911 call. Right? Police come, they investigate, they arrest the bad guy, he goes to jail, there's a hearing, the court issues a no contact order, which is what we do here in Billings. Then there's pretrial hearings, trials. If this is just a misdemeanor, this could take a year to get him through the criminal justice process and get him sentenced maybe to probation. When the police respond, they may or may not call CPS. In this case, they did. So Child Protective Services response. I'm not going to pretend to know all the things that go into a CPS report or response. But there are multiple hearings, assessments for the kids, placement decisions, potentially additional police reports. All of that entire process is happening, and CPS expects Rachel to stay involved. If she wants to keep her kids, she needs to participate in the CPS system. Rachel got a protective order, which is what we suggest for our domestic violence victims. Get a protective order. Protective orders are civil matters, right? They don't become criminal until they're violated. So that's a civil court matter. Rachel got an order of protection. That means bad guy gets served with a temporary order. There is a hearing set for a permanent order. That means that the victim and suspect appear in a courtroom like this and present to the judge why she wants a protective order. She has to face that suspect in court. He gets to ask her questions. If he's not represented by an attorney, he gets to represent himself at that hearing and actually ask her questions about why she's scared of him. Because there are kids involved, then it turns into a potentially parenting plan issue, custody issue, visitation with the kids. No contact orders, again, that's triggered by the PFMA arrest. He doesn't follow the no contact order because a lot of them don't. That means that she's calling, neighbors are calling repeatedly when he shows back up at the house or back up at her apartment. The landlord doesn't like the police there all the time. And so now Rachel is facing eviction because the cops keep showing up at her house. So she and her kids facing eviction. She doesn't know what that means for CPS because now she has to explain why she doesn't have a stable living situation. She's filing for divorce anyway. That divorce and custody are family law matters. Again, I'm not going to pretend that I know the entire system when it comes to dissolution and family law, but I expect that it can be quite a process. So the system that Rachel got into just for calling 911, trying to get the assault to stop, can include civil law, criminal law, and family law. And it looks like this. I work in the system and I can't find my way through that. So that is system-generated risk. Again, not a victim-friendly place. Not surprising that she became, quote, uncooperative. That's not just a fictitious story that happens right here in Billings. This is a petition for an order of protection. The victim explains, he chokes me and will not stop. The next question said, did the police come? No. No, I just wanted to leave my home and get away. She didn't want to have to call the police. So you can see how the cycle of domestic violence continues. There's the power and control tactics, which create the risks, which create barriers to leaving, so the victims stay in the relationship, and the tactics continue. I have heard an opinion, even within the Billings Police Department, that law enforcement can't solve domestic violence because we're not there when it happens. And I agree that we are reactive, right? And we can't solve domestic violence. But I disagree that it's because we're not present on scene. I think we're rarely present when a building gets burglarized. We're rarely present in an intersection during a DUI crash. So not witnessing the crime is not an issue. I'm not sure why it becomes such a sticking point in domestic violence. And my opinion is that it's because we expect victims to want our help, just like a robbery victim would want our help. That's an issue because escaping domestic violence literally is cost prohibitive. There's a high cost to these victims. It's not just testifying against a stranger. There is a cost to victims participating in the system. Like I showed you already, leaving dramatically increases their risk. And the system looks like this. We're asking victims to put themselves here at an increased risk. So it's just not conducive to victims actually following through and leaving. And that brings me to my plug for the Family Justice Center project. If we can streamline the system and reduce the system-generated risks, wrap services and support around victims, that will also help victims decrease their life-generated risks, and that will decrease the effect of abuser-generated risks. And that is how we turn victims into survivors. So I will put my information up. And then Ellie, do you want to come and talk about the Family Justice Center project?
Council, Mayor, thank you for your time. I'd like to provide an update on the Family Justice Center project, but first I want to thank everyone who participated in the community forum and the city administration meeting during our study tour. It was incredibly successful. It's very exciting. But the question is, and what I would like to ask is if council is supportive that we continue the technical assistance contract with the Family Justice Center Alliance by moving forward with the strategic planning workshops in September. What does that entail? The strategic planning workshops are essentially the study tour, but more focused on questions like, what do we want our Family Justice Center model to look like? I don't know what that would look like, if that's an informal vote or if y'all would just tell me right now if you are supportive. But that is the main reason why I'm here. And if there are any questions or if there's any other additional information I can provide, please feel free to ask or email me.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Katie. Great presentation. This one, we'll remember this one for a while. Council, it's 7:35, 6, whatever. We usually take a break around 7:30. I hate to break us up in the middle of this. Do we have any public comment on this item? Raise your hand if there is, just for our planning purposes. So it doesn't look like there's going to be a lot of public comment. How much, council, do you have in the way of questions or discussion? Should we take a break now and come back, or do you want to just try to push through and finish this up? Yeah. Finish it? Okay. Okay, well, that's what we'll do then. Great, thank you very much. So questions for Katie and Ollie, and then we can also have any discussion. Questions, Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. So I saw Katie's 90-minute presentation at the Citizens Police Academy, and it was so impactful to me that I reached out to Chris and Katie to see if there would be time for her to come and do a truncated version. I think getting to hear some of this it's very different than just reading the numbers. And so I feel like it felt like really important foundational knowledge for us as we have this conversation about the Family Justice Center. If you need to hear it from me, I'm certainly very supportive of moving forward with that and continuing the strategic planning. And I hope that the rest of council is as well.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Is Council moving, if the ask is whether or not Council wants to move forward, what cost might be associated with that? Thank you.
Councilmember Joy, Mayor and Council, the contract right now is fully paid for out of the previous fiscal year and from some grant money from the domestic violence program. So the contract as it stands now is fully funded. There's no additional cost. Moving forward, we expect to get a study tour letter in the next month, probably. They'll be back, the Family Justice Center Alliance will be back in the middle of September to do a strategic planning set of days, and then they will draft a strategic planning report, which is quite comprehensive, is my understanding, to really outline our next steps. And then the contract also covers some continuing technical assistance. So that part is already paid for. And then I think the next steps, we will hopefully have a better grasp on additional costs or what we're looking at.
Councilmember Joy.
Thank you. Just to follow up. So what you're asking is whether we have the commitment to follow this through to what might end up being a part of. That's what I'm not quite sure. I mean, what is council's buy-in in this process? That's what I'm trying to get at. Thank you.
Sure. Yes, I think that's accurate. Just a reaffirmation that this is something that council wants to do, that after the scope of the project is over, that a Family Justice Center for Billings, the first in the state, is something that council could stand behind. I know when the Family Justice Center Alliance came, they were very excited at the buy-in on the city administration level. It's not something that they see often. So to have city officials saying, we think this is a good idea, we think this can reduce crimes and reduce homicides, that kind of thing, was exciting for them. And so I think we were just hoping for a reaffirmation that that still is a priority for council.
Katie, I'll just follow up on that. You know, this body, like most government bodies, works very incrementally, one slow step after another. So my understanding is that the question is whether we want to continue this investigation process of the strategic planning process, et cetera. But I just want to clarify that you're not asking for a commitment to go out and build a Family Justice Center when you leave tonight. But that's not what we are communicating, because I don't think it is, right?
Correct, yes, Mayor and Council, that is correct.
Are we on the same page there that we're talking about whatever that next step in the planning process is?
Yes, that's absolutely right. We are definitely still in the planning phase. potentially looking at sites that would be conducive to a family justice center, but actually constructing a building, even constructing the framework for participants is a long way off, and that'll be part of the strategic planning process that is paid for already.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Rowan?
Well, I think it's probably no surprise that I fully endorse this work. I think you guys have done incredible work so far. The study tour was great. It had, I think, great community participation. I would hope that we as council think about this not as a sort of social service project happening in the community, but a fundamental core part of the way we do law enforcement. That this is a public safety strategy, not a community project. It will be a community-led effort because it has to be. It has to be driven by the survivors and the victims who need it, by their participants who will work in it. But I would expect that if what we do is follow the course of what has happened already, this will start with better law enforcement and prosecution collaboration across jurisdictions. This will begin with, even if it's not a city-led project, it will begin with significant city resources in terms of personnel. So I think there's important reasons for council to be at the table, even if this ultimately is not cited inside of the city of Billings or a city-led project. This is a law enforcement strategy, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to continue participating. I'm so grateful for those of you who did. I am so grateful to Katie and Ellie for making this a priority. It is 51% of the assaults in the community, so this is a critical part of our budget and policy leadership, and I just really am thrilled with what's been accomplished so far.
Great, thank you. Other questions, comments? Councilmember Puritan?
Thank you, Katie and Ellie, and I appreciate your efforts, and also our city police department. And I am 100% behind this because I think it just, when you look at that many cases just within our little town here, then I think it is definitely a direction to go. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. 48 years ago, one of my first calls as the deputy sheriff was the same woman that you talked with on here. I mean, nothing's changed in almost 50 years, but you have. I didn't have anybody like you to call back then. I was on my own. So we do need this, and I do support it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Councilmember Tricky.
Like Councilmember Owens, obviously I support this effort. I just want to remind us that, yes, what we're doing here is coordinating the law and justice side of this, and that is an incredibly important thing. But also I want to remind us that if someone has to make a 911 call about a family violence situation, we have failed. We have failed. So the ultimate goal is to put Katie out of a job.
I agree.
I don't think she would mind that. Any other questions, comments on this item? Thumbs up. Okay. All right. Katie, Ellie, thank you very much for your work, and others in the community that are working on this, we know. So we'll stay tuned.
Thank you.
And cooperate. Thank you. Council, it's 7:43. Let's take a break. We'll come back as close to 7:50 as we can and continue with item number 3, further discussion on crime prevention through environmental design principles.
Mayor Cole, I don't know if you got a copy of
We're on item number 3, SEPTED principles and strategies, and Sergeant Nate West is our presenter. Chris, you have anything before this, or we just turn it over to the sergeant?
That's Kevin.
Or Kevin, Chris, Kevin.
Nope, nothing more to add. Sergeant Nate West is going to give you an introduction to the SEPTED principles for some of you that might not have heard some of this, so we'll let him kick it off.
Okay. Welcome.
Council, Mayor, good evening. Nate West, Billings Police Department. I'm our public relations sergeant currently. I've been with the police department for 16 years. Grew up in Billings, so along with growing up in Billings, going to school and then being a police officer, work patrol all 3 shifts. I've been a sergeant for 7 years, so I've seen the grow in our community and the grow in the crime rate in our community. I think it's pretty safe to say, and especially I've been a patrol officer and then supervised patrol officers. Our officers receive excellent training, and they're really good at responding to calls for service and then investigating those crimes, right? But when they're responding to those calls for service, that crime has already happened. So the number one question that we always ask is how do we prevent crime, right? We're never going to stop it. If we stopped it, I would be out of a job, and that would really suck. So, but we can do things to mitigate crime, right? So up until about 2.5 years ago, when I started my current position, I had never heard of SEPTED. And then getting in my position, I'd heard SEPTED. I did a little bit of research online, but I never really got the full experience or understanding of it until here at the end of May. I was fortunate enough to go through the 5-day, 40-hour training, and it opened my eyes. So in working with the city administrator and the chief of police, we formulated a committee, and not just the police department, but a city department-wide committee, talking about data collection. What are we going to do that's data-driven? Some hard-hitting aspects of that committee, guys, that we see there's a problem. It's not going to take a ton of work to fix it. They've been going out and doing some work already in our parks and our downtown area. And then the long-term planning, right? But as with everything, it's crawl, walk, run. So under the directive of the city administrator, he wanted me to put together just a basic, simple, just introduction for you guys, for the council, on what SEPTED is. So that's what I'm going to do here for you. So SEPTED is what it's called, crime prevention through environmental design. And so my funny little picture over there, you think of crime, you think of law enforcement, right? We're attacking crime, but it needs to be not just the Billings Police Department, but other city departments and our community as a whole, right? So crime prevention defined as the anticipation, recognition, and appraisal of a crime risk and the initiation of some action to remove or reduce the risk of that activity. And then the goal of SEPTED is to reduce opportunity for crime that may be inherent in the design of structures, design of neighborhoods, and the design of areas of public right-of-way. So public right-of-way, like alleys downtown, we have tons of city parks, right? Some are great, some need a lot of work. So that's kind of what we're looking at, starting to improve with SEPTED right-of-way, or some public right-of-way areas for people in our community. So there's 4 basic overlapping concepts for SEPTED, and I'm just going to talk about some of those in detail. So natural surveillance, and I didn't get any local pictures because we have another presentation coming for you guys down the road. One of our committee members that's actually been out in the downtown area and parks making some improvements. And I didn't want to steal his pictures that he's going to show you at a later date. But you can see there the before. It's super overgrown, not able to see in, and even more importantly, not able to see out, right? So natural surveillance is the placement of physical features, activities, and people in a way that maximizes visibility. I remember being a night shift patrol officer, young, running and gunning hard, and in the middle, like those late 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, we'd go out and we'd look for prowlers. We'd go out looking for people that are trying to break into cars and break into houses. And we always found those people in areas with dense vegetation where they could hide. Because if they feel like they can't be seen, that gives them that feeling of safety that they're not going to be caught, as well as lighting, right? So dark, covered places. So the more we can mitigate that, the better off we are. Natural surveillance increases the threat of apprehension by taking steps to increase the perception that people can be seen. Next, we move on to natural access control. Natural access control means controlling access to a site. People are physically guided through a space by the strategic design of streets, sidewalks, building entrances, and landscaping. Ensuring that entrances are visible, well lit, and overlooked by windows. Clearly defining entryways and controlling other points of access. Highlighting main entrances, we call these celebrated entryways. Clearly marked public walkways and paths, and comprehensive wayfinding system. And those are some photos there. Top left there, that's a park. So we got a big picture identifying and naming that park. And then we got an entryway going into that park. And then bottom right, kind of looks like maybe some apartment buildings or townhouses. There to the left of that bottom right picture is that unfinished walkway. Not really going to be used by anybody that has any right to be there, and probably going to invoke more criminal activity. And then you look, on the right, they continue that walkway. They kind of put a sitting area there in the middle to invite people to that area. And then some nice landscaping, and it looks like they put some lights in there also. And then territorial reinforcement. So territorial reinforcement is the use of physical attributes that express ownership. So fencing, pavement treatments, art, signage, landscaping. You were at the Strawberry Festival and you were at the local art, right? Using local artists to make art just like they did behind City Hall here on the wall. That used to be just a dirty brick wall. Now it's a beautiful piece of art. I grew up on the south side of Billings. That 6th Street underpass has always been filthy and full of graffiti, but that artist came in and did that amazing work. And I guarantee the people that did graffiti before are still traveling that area, but it's artwork. So they're not gonna paint over it and color it, if that makes sense, right? We can use that on sidewalks. We can use that on streets, downtown area. And then last is maintenance. Allows for the continued use of space for its intended purpose. Serves as an additional expression of ownership. Prevents reduction of visibility from overgrown landscaping and obstructed or inoperative lighting. So again, you guys familiar with the broken window theory? Right? So the broken window theory, broken windows in an area encourage vandals to break more windows, which leads to more crime, drug activity, more vandalism. Same with graffiti. If we don't clean it up, you're just gonna see it continue to increase in that area. Graffiti encourages more graffiti. This is just the maintenance of property, activating that space, encouraging people to go to these areas. Positive activities, I feel like, discourages criminal activity, if that makes sense. And so you could probably, and this is we talk about public areas, public parks. I know the DBA has done a lot of septet evaluations in the downtown area. The Commerce, I know you've done some residential stuff, but you could literally do this to your residents in a weekend and look at that, the difference. So talk about the fear of crime and public perception. Public perception is huge. Public perception is that crime of all kinds is consistently rising, and law enforcement's efforts of active crime prevention are failing. I was unaware of this until we started this committee, and we had a data collection meeting, and I was made aware of the Billings National Community 2022 survey, so last year, and the numbers of that show the majority, 75% of the people that took that survey believe that we're failing in the efforts of crime prevention. So if people feel like crime is rising and we're not doing anything to curb it, SEPTED is a great tool and opportunity for us to show active crime prevention efforts. So overall vision, implement SEPTED principles throughout the city to allow the citizens of Billings to engage with the community by reducing crime and making the community safer. Encourage innovative crime prevention strategies, partner with organizations and property owners to improve social cohesion, public safety, and livability. And so just I didn't go crazy on stats, and that's a pretty wide array, but it's pretty, even that low end, 30%, right? That's pretty substantial. So communities around the nation that have implemented CPTED have seen success rates ranging from 30 to 80% in areas that CPTED was implemented. I mean, if stats show that, why wouldn't we use it? Any questions? And so I didn't know that my cohort was going to be here tonight, but the majority of the CPTED committee is here, so if I can't answer a question, they can.
Thank you, Serge. I'll just start with the obvious one here. Do we know how they measure success to get to those kind of numbers?
And so, Jen, and so that's been a big discussion in planning, is what's going to drive areas that we're going to make these improvements, right? So the first thing we started is we have a crime analyst, works for the Billings Police Department, and we were talking about areas of public right-of-way, public parks. Billings has some great public parks, and it has some great public parks that with just a little bit of work would be like a light switch, would be a night and day different. North Park, for example, that's kind of one that's high on our radar. So what we did is we had Bobby pull stats for all of our city parks, and North Park fell in that top 5. So to answer your question, when we do an evaluation and then we make improvements on an area, example, North Park, we'll document the changes that were made. We'll keep track of those stats from prior improvements. And then, I mean, it's going to take some time. You're going to take 6 months, a year, but keep checking those numbers on that area to see what benefits, if any, we had with those improvements.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Dre?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And Superintendent Dr. Garcia came to the Local Affairs Subcommittee meeting, and part of what we talked about was areas where the city and the school district have overlap in needs and concerns that are both in the school district and in the city. And since one of your former colleagues, Jeremy House, now works for the school district in terms of safety, I can sort of see that there are possibilities for some cooperation between the two in looking at CPTED, and maybe that's something where, because even though the kids are just walking to school, they're still in our community, and our Safe Routes to School is a big project, but I can really see some possibilities for overlap and bringing about a deeper sense of safety in our community. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Other questions? Comments? Wow, quiet group. All right.
I'm okay.
So anyway, we'll just look for the committee. Is there any sort of a timeline, or what would be the next step, do you think, for this?
So we're in the planning stages right now. And so Comanche Park, before we started this committee, before the training came to Billings, there was some issues with Comanche Park, which is over there near 1301 Industrial. That's a low-income housing residential area in our community, south 12th Street West. And it's really out of the way. Doesn't really have that inviting people, and it had a lot of issues with it. So that came down. What could we do with this? The chief had the idea, could we do CPTED evaluation? I reached out to a sergeant that's CPTED certified before I was. He went out and he did a really, really good evaluation, and they're making improvements on that as we speak. We're making improvements on North Park. So being in the planning stage, like I said, we're kind of still that crawl, walk, run. But as often as you guys wanted feedback from us, we'd be happy to bring that and present it to you.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Gulick?
Just make a quick comment that I also went to just the very first part of the training that you went to. And, someone who's involved in the design as an architect of our built environment, some of the ideas of CPTED were certainly very familiar, and some of it is just common sense in a sense. But I think just that having the framework it gives a real attention to things that, we didn't really didn't but think about that in our projects. Now we have checklists in our projects going forward, and yeah, we find things that we wouldn't otherwise do. I think this is excellent that that the city's working on prevention. So wholeheartedly support what you're doing with the others, and appreciate members of the council and community who have advanced this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Purinton?
Just a quick comment, I think, and Dan might be better to answer this. You can too, if you want to try. But it's been my understanding for insurance companies. They send out people that are adept at fighting fires. And especially in these more rural areas. And just think of some of our mountain homes and, you know, how you get the vegetation away from the property and so forth and so on. And so it was, I know Councilmember Boyett and I were talking, I thought, well, to me, if SEPTAD is so good at, you know, these principles, then I'm wondering why insurance companies don't kind of look at homes within urban areas and say, well, gee, we'll give you a break on your insurance if you do X, you know, whatever it takes. And so I kind of see where some of these efforts, whether it's within the city or in neighborhoods, because I think that's a big issue. I think we grew up with SEPTAD principles and didn't know it. But it's just the idea, and like Ed said, a lot of it's common sense, that some people forget. So I don't know if that's ever been approached that way, that insurance companies would look at, you know, the fire hazards, the theft hazards, you know, based on some of the SEPTAD principles.
And I haven't looked into that, haven't done any research. Do you have any knowledge on that?
Mayor and Council, Councilwoman Purinton, I would just offer that most of what we do in our SEPTAD work is with commercial properties, not the residential side of things. I would think if any of our 6 watchers on Facebook tonight are residential insurance folks, gosh, let's have a chat and talk about what we could get for a discount for residences. When we offered our most recent 5-day, 40-hour training here in Billings, we did actually have a woman from California who was a commercial risk insurance manager. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it, and I was a little bit bummed because I did want to ask, you know, how do you implement SEPTAD in your business practices? So other places around the country are doing this. I think I've said it before, we're kind of catching up to what other folks have done to make some common sense security updates in their environments.
Councilor Purinton, I guess I'd just comment that your typical homeowner's policy or CGL, comprehensive general liability policy for a business, covers an occurrence that is an accidental event. They don't provide coverage for the intentional actions of others, which is what crime is. So if somebody breaks in your house and destroys your house, you're not going to have insurance coverage for that. So they don't have any incentive to reduce it, I think be the most likely answer to that one. I wish they did, though. That's a great idea. Okay, anything else for Sergeant West? If not, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Look forward to further reports. Is there any public comment on item number 3?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Again, Dan Brooks with the Billings Chamber at 815 South 27th Street. I wanted to thank Officer West for his presentation here, going over some of those basics, the core concepts of SEPTAD. We've been offering and implementing SEPTAD with our business community since 2020. We've done over 65 evaluations of properties here in Billings since then. I can't tell you the tally on all the number of recommendations that have been implemented. Some businesses can go and make those recommendations, changes done. They can do that pretty quickly. They have budget to do so. Some have to wait for their next budgeting cycles to make modest improvements. I wanted to thank you for your partnership on bringing the National Institute of Crime Prevention to Billings to offer that training to city staff and others. I think that was a huge step forward in generating and bringing more awareness of SEPTED and its usefulness to our community. I want to just kind of build off of what Officer West said, that it's eye-opening, and I would agree and even add that I think it's one of those things that once you see it, you can't stop unseeing it. Shoot, Jack and I are going to head out and do some light meter readings later tonight once it gets dark, and have some of that data for a SEPTED evaluation that we're doing. And I almost guarantee you that at least half of our conversation is going to be, well, we could use more natural access control and natural surveillance, and just kind of geek out on it. But it's very much common sense, but to kind of Councilman Gulick's point of putting it all together, really in order to have a good program of implementing these practices that have good outcomes, like Officer West showed, that reduction in crime. If he's quoting one of the pieces of research that I've recently read, they are measuring burglaries in a neighborhood. So they do have those statistics. I'm happy to share with council some of that data-driven research on SEPTED to show its positive impacts. Lastly, I would just offer, as City Council and staff moves forward with implementing a SEPTED program, we're here to help. Please utilize us as a resource, and we're happy to go and SEPTED all around Billings. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment on this item? Don't see any, so we'll close the public comment period and move on to our last regular agenda item, Parks, Recreation, and Trails Bond Resolution. Kevin, you want to introduce that, which I think will be turning it over to Gina, right? But
Yeah.
Kevin.
Thanks, Mayor. Staff, we don't have a presentation this evening. I'll turn it quickly over to Gina, just kind of how we got to this point, and then turn it over to council on next steps.
Thank you. Mayor, council, you have been presented with the information. The staff memo contains both the initiative and the initiative outline, the information that Councilmember Rupsis provided in his initiative. That information from the initiative was formatted into a resolution format using artificial intelligence, essentially. It was just kind of put through a process. It's in resolution format. It's simply what Councilmember Rupsis has in his information. It's just been regurgitated into a resolution format with the recitals and the title and, all the things we need to have in a resolution. But as I stated in the staff memo, I have not reviewed or edited any of that information, and that's just mostly because it's in such it's in its initial format, and really I think that I need some input, feedback, direction from you all before I spend any significant amount of time on that. I would be afraid that if I attempted to do that, it would just get edited to pieces. So it seemed more appropriate to get some feedback from you all first, and so it's just in its raw format for your review and discussion tonight.
Okay, thank you. So, Council, how do you want to proceed? I'll just comment that at our last meeting, which was only a week ago, the request was made by Councilmember Rupsis that comments be given in writing to the outline of that resolution that he had prepared as quickly as possible. And we got Thursday night extensive comments from Councilmember Owen and this morning from Councilmember Purington. So thank you very much for jumping right on that. Nothing like having it in writing and in detail. So that's great. But I think Councilmember Rupsis would say this was not the deadline. Please keep doing that. But Councilmember Rupsis, since it's your initiative, and I'd like to hear a little bit more, I think, from Councilmember Owen, Councilmember Purington about some of the major themes. It's 8:20, and there were a lot of pages, single space there. I guess I'd recommend we not have dozens of motions this evening, but we're all together. And we also need to talk a little bit about schedule. And in particular, our next work session is still on our agenda for July 31st. We talked about the possibility of having this being an item there, but at our last meeting had a little show of hands, and it was going to be a light meeting. I think we had at least 4 council members then that were going to be gone. I'm supposed to be flying in Monday afternoon on an airplane, so God willing, I'll be there, but don't count on it. Councilmember Boyette, you might be leading that meeting. But at this point, we still do have a July 31st work session. This is not on that agenda, I believe, but it is on the August 7th agenda, which would be the next one. So that's a little bit about the scheduling. Before we kind of turn it over to Councilmember Owen, Councilmember Purington, and others, Councilmember Ripsa, since it is your initiative, do you want to steer us, comment?
I don't really have much to say other than thank you, Councilmember Owen and Purington for documenting those. And like the mayor said, please keep those suggestions coming. It's not too late until we vote to accept it. So if you've got comments that you want in and considered, then please get those in. And other than that, I would just ask council members Owen and Purington to, if you want to speak and address your comments in a overview kind of way, without having to dig into each and every one of them. I think that would be great to hear that. You don't want 4 pages. Or 6.
Okay, well, how, between the two of you, do you care who starts, or?
Well, because as I said, mine were just comments. I didn't have solutions. I think Jennifer offered more solutions. And I agreed, and I think you pretty much addressed, the issues that I have. So I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, and she can, you can go through page 1. But I just think, as we mentioned before, in going through this document, I felt like there was a real, and I just hate to keep saying it, lack of transparency, but based on the fact that I don't know where a lot of this stuff came from. I don't know who suggested it. I don't know if this just is out of Tom's head, which I'm just amazed. Not that you couldn't think of all this stuff, Tom. But one of the first things that I do want to address is what the primary goal of these bonded projects are. I just think A, B, and C are, I don't think that's it. There's obviously no mention of the rec center in a primary goal. And so whenever you go back, to me, the primary goal of this is, 1, we're trying to fund parks for continued development, and for some of the parks are deteriorating, but it's basically to complete parks that have not been finished over 40 years plus, and also to build a rec center. To me, those are the primary goals here. So I just think there's work on the goals. I think and the ones that I think are there, because we're not replacing existing and deteriorating facilities. I don't think that's what we're doing here. And so, anyway,
I think the South Pool is the kind of the poster child on that one. Right.
Well, but that's going to be a completely, remakes. Yeah. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say about it, because you all read my comments, and I think Jennifer addressed a lot of them, so I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Rowan?
Well, I'm not exactly sure how to proceed here. Obviously, I sent these to the council email, so everybody has them, the public has them. I think I would just highlight a couple things as my primary concerns that I hope we can resolve. The largest, as I said when we had this vote last week, is I don't like the fact that this seems to, in my opinion, prioritize the rec center over existing parks. There is a promise that there will be some private sector fundraising, but Centennial, Castle Rock, Poly Vista, well, they don't get to start until that private sector fundraising happens, even though what we heard from the stakeholders is that most of the fundraising will be for the rec center. It doesn't mean, right, that people can't and won't donate to parks, they do, but the opportunity and I think the mobilization that we heard from stakeholders is we're fundraising for a rec center. That's fine, but then put the consequences with the rec center. I don't like the idea that we're penalizing our parks, that we're saying that if the private sector fundraising doesn't come through, the parks budgets get cut, or if the private sector fundraising doesn't come through, construction on the parks doesn't start. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's equitable. If we're going to do something of this magnitude, and I do think it's a pretty big if right now, from what I hear from people in the community, then I think we need to ensure that every neighborhood benefits. And selecting out some parks to wait or suffer the consequences of a lack of mobilization of private funds for the rec center is something that profoundly concerns me. So that is something I hope we can debate and discuss, because I think the approach that's laid out right now is not one, it's absolutely not one that I could support. Similarly, I think there is a long history of people in the community being told something and then there's not follow through. There's not delivery on those promises. So if part of the value of a private fundraising effort is to show community support for this, to show stakeholder contribution to this, then I think it's important that we realize some of that we actually have a cash in hand obligation. Some donations come in over time. That's just the reality of it. But some don't. And I think there ought to be some conversation about if there's going to be a $12 million goal for private sector fundraising, which is about 10% of the rec center, then I think we ought to think about how much we should actually have cash on hand before we start moving forward. And what I saw in the resolution, and I could be corrected if I'm wrong, is that the goal of the private sector fundraising is just to pay debt service over time. But I think it's financially more responsible to offset the need for the debt in the first place. So I think we ought to talk about trying to use some capital contributions for offsets and reduce the amount of debt. I also think that we should be very clear, or at least put some constraints around how often debt gets issued. If we're going to do this, we cannot expect taxpayers to absorb this wall up all at once. And certainly, we ought to actually do some things. People should see benefit before we continue to issue debt and put this community on the hook. So I think there ought to be some time constraints about how often debt is issued and how much is issued at any one time. I think there is this concept of community steering committees for each of the projects. The composition of those committees really matter because, as I understand it, they're going to be vested with some decision making, particularly if the current provision survives, that budgets get cut if private sector fundraising doesn't come through. So if Castle Rock Park's budget is going to get cut, I expect Heights residents to be at the table for that. I don't want to see steering committees that are carbon copies of each other filled with people who have particular agendas. I am fine with people who have agendas being on them. That's what makes a community work. But I think we need to ensure that neighbors are a part of these communities too, that the people who benefit, the people who often feel like they don't have a voice, quite frankly, in this process, should be at the table. So I think that composition of these steering committees, particularly if they're making decisions, really matters. And then the last thing that I think I offered up was some concerns about the private sector campaign. It's not unusual. We're all up here because of politics. People do ballot advocacy campaigns, but the way that our city staff participate in that really matters. We need to do this ethically and honestly. I think we need to be very forthcoming. I think our use of tax dollars to educate voters is appropriate, but then we ought to actually educate them rather than advocate to them, which means we ought to express where there are opinions, pros and cons. We ought to express the yes side and the no side. So for example, if there's going to be an FAQ document that talks about, responses to the community to frequently asked questions, where those responses are opinion-based, they ought to say, proponents would say, and opponents would say, so that we're being clear with the public that we are not going to use your tax dollars to advocate for you to be taxed higher. That's just irresponsible. So those were a couple of the things that I laid out in what was definitely not a 6-page document. And I think I'm happy to discuss other provisions. I'm not sure how we proceed at this point with giving Gina that feedback that she's asked for, but those are some of my concerns that I think are weighing heavily on me.
Okay, thank you. We'll jump into discussion there, and I'm going to give it to Councilmember Tariki, but I'm just going to comment on the last thing for Gina. I would recommend, Gina, that although your hesitancy is understandable, Don't wait too long. Go, jump in, use your judgment. I guess what I'd like some clarity or agreement on is that this is still a staff document. I mean, the initiative was for staff to prepare this resolution. If you're waiting for us to tell you exactly what everything is, you're never going to get there, right? So, that's just my comment, that it's still, in my mind at least, a staff document. That means you're going to use your own judgment on some of these things, and we may have to come back and make changes based on our judgment. But Councilmember Trickey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make a quick comment in reference to the last point that Councilmember Owens just made. During both of the public safety mill levies, I thought that the staff did an excellent job of drawing the line between educating the public and letting others do the advocacy, either pro or con, for the thing. So that is not something that I am worried about whatsoever. It is a fairly straightforward path, and they know it. This is what we're doing. This is what we're proposing. This is how much it's going to cost. This is what it's going to cost you. And that is pretty much what they did. That is all they did during the public safety mill levies, and that is all I expect staff to be doing during this process. The other thing that I want to say is I'm very fine with what the mayor mentioned at the beginning of the meeting about there being a subgroup of council or a subcommittee of council getting together and taking a look at the actual wording of this document and moving it forward. I do not have any problems with the language that I saw at the beginning, and I don't really have any problems with the language that has been, or the comments that have been made, or the solutions moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Shaw. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you. I wanted to just echo that Councilmember Rupsis and I had a conversation about maybe, we sit down with Councilmember Owen and we can actually really hash through all of this. It's difficult to do that in a meeting. So I feel like I would make time to do that in the next few weeks. And then maybe that small group can give a recommendation to Gina so that we can move this process forward.
Yeah, if that happens, I would encourage Gina to be there so that she can
Gina
hear
has to be there, yeah.
the give and take, right? Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I brought with me my master plan. And I just wanted to mention, if any of you, council members, I don't know how you get a copy of this one, but this is a great document that was done for Colson Park. And the really fantastic part of it, as you can tell, I've used it a little, it's crumpled, but it's got pictures and everything. It's a beautiful document. So I know that this is a higher level discussion than some nice pictures in here. But at the same time, if you really don't are not clear or not sure of what Colson Park could be, some of these master plans are very helpful in trying to really wrap your head around what kind of investment we make and what that investment could look like. So I recommend, if you haven't got a copy of this, try to pull one out. My second comment is that, I got out my master plan for the rec center and we're following the process exactly. So I looked at what came next and what came next and what came next, and we are following that process as it was laid out. I also would like to say, in the master plan, there are some very good bullet points about the pros and cons of partnerships and contractual agreements. Some of the things that may come up as you're making a contractual agreement, some of the issues, contract terms, and some other things that are in the master plan for the rec center, if anyone is interested in looking through that. I do have some suggestions, but they're only very small. In terms of wording, I think kind of thinking about my last week, or maybe it was earlier this week, last week, sometimes we're not clear as council, and we get really maybe not 35,000, maybe we're at 60,000, and we say something like, we want you to follow our policies, and then they don't, because they're like, what policy? So I think there's a lot of details that can be put in terms of the way that we expect in agreement or in a partnership exactly how we'd like that to work out. And so I appreciate that this is a rough draft and put through AI to come out in a kind of resolution form. I appreciate that. But I think that clearer is better when it comes to partnerships, because very often you would assume, and that's the beginning of every mistake, I've been told, that they would understand they have to follow our procurement process, not just think about it. So I think it's a very good start, and I do believe that we as council need to craft a resolution that reflects the intent of what we're doing with our parks and the concerns of council members, but it can't be a document that's going to be handcuffs. It has to have that flexibility. No one knew we were going to end up with ARPA money. It would be a shame to say we wouldn't allow ARPA or some other, who knows what, coming down the road to be a choice for us to invest in this too. So in terms of debt service, not borrowing as much and paying down in the front end, I think we've done as a city, on my time on council, the number of times that we have been able to reduce our debt with Dealer Park and others simply by being good stewards of money. And that was a big investment, but we've consistently been financially good stewards, of taxpayer money, and really benefited from doing those payments and in ways and financing that have saved us money. So I would expect that is a tradition of the city. Actually, one of the values of the community of Billings. In one of our many public discussions, we talked about values, and actually people identified fiscal responsibility as something that Billings is good at. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. This was one of the reasons I asked that we split the vote between the parks and the rec centers, because I was concerned about this. We're going to ask the public for $143 million, period. The $12 million we anticipate raising is on the side, has nothing to do with that. All we're going to do is pay down some debt, and it says if we don't raise that, we're going to have to cut all of the projects in order. Well, to me, the $12 million probably was meant more for the rec center than it did for Cottonwood Park. So I would like, in my mind, to have the public vote $143 million. If we get extra money, which we're going to get, great. But why would we have to cut any parks if we don't raise the $12 million? Because we've already told the public we're going to pay for all this. To me, that's the $12 million is extra, not fluff money, but extra money that we're going to use. We can tell the public, oh, by the way, we got some spare money. The other answer is let's raise the $12 million before we do this. That might be one solution, and say, oh, by the way, we don't have to charge you $143 million. We already got $12 million in cash. But I think the rec center is different than the parks. And I agree with Councilman Owen that I like the parks kind of left alone and just fix the parks that, and the survey that was done said that's what the public wanted. Fix the parks that we currently have. It didn't say to do anything else. So if we're going to depend on the $12 million, I think that should go towards the rec center. And if we don't get the $12 million, I think the rec center should go down, but I think we should leave the parks by themselves with their money that we're going to allocate to them. That's
okay. Yeah, which is consistent with the comments that Councilmember Rowan was saying. I'm going to recognize Councilmember Gulick, but I'm going to mention a question for Councilmember Rupsis, but I'll give him a minute to think about it while Councilmember Gulick addresses it. What the question is going to be is, Councilmember Rupsis, can you tell us a little bit after Councilmember Gulick about how third parties are going to play into this and agreements with third parties and the timing of that? Because the resolution envisions certain agreements with TrailNet about what they're contributing, the chamber on fundraising issues and things like that. I don't know that we have the time to wait until our resolution is pinned down before we negotiate the terms of those agreements. And I'm just curious about how we proceed on both tracks, expeditiously time-wise. So, but Councilmember Gulick.
Yeah, I won't be speaking so much to the content of the proposed resolution, other than I'm just really glad that you've been keeping notes for a year or so and be able to compile this document that I think is unusual, if not unprecedented, in terms of us going forward with the bond. There's obviously a lot of moving parts here, so starting to nail down some things. So I think it's really good. I think there's been some good input from Councilmember Owen and Purrington and others. So I think the idea of a small group getting together, I'm going to be much better at seeing something in front of us to react to. So I think that's a good next step. But again, I really do appreciate that we have this process that we've created for ourselves. And so thank you.
Thank you very much. You heard the question, gave you a minute to think.
Yeah.
Do you want to comment a little
Thanks,
about
Mayor.
these other agreements that are out there, and what does that mean for timing?
So let's just take, I guess, the 12 million first, which is really 6 and 6. 6 million, well, we want to get to 12 million raised, and if it happens to be 8 million capital and 4 million grants, I don't think anybody's going to have a problem with that, but at least $6 million raised on a capital campaign that has already kicked off. As you heard last week, we've got $1 million pledged plus $1 million match pledged from Parr, Montana, and we're thrilled to get that. So $6 million for a capital campaign. It's already kicked off. The chamber, and I can't remember how they put all the funds together to pay for that, but they've engaged Melanie Schwartz to lead that capital campaign. It's going, and it is not, contrary to a perception, that it is not a fundraising campaign for the rec center. It is a capital campaign for all the projects under this bond package. And we're putting together materials to do so. We talk about in the resolution, potential naming rights packages or approaches and those types of things across all of the projects. So please don't consider that the capital campaign or the grants are only for the rec center. And it's not even going to be the primary focus. It's not going to be like, hey, we're trying to raise money for a rec center, and if you want to, there's these other things over here. Right? It is an entire package that is being put out there for community support. The reason we wanted to have that was to actually give the community the opportunity to say, yes, this is important, and ahead of the November vote, to get out there and put some money in play and say, yes, I'm in on this, I like it, I want to support this, and here's my proof. Here are my dollars to show that I support this. And if it, and so by doing so, we generate that community excitement, community support for all the projects throughout the package. TrailNet is a little bit different of a situation in that their primary or one of the big funding mechanisms for the TrailNet projects will be the Transportation Alternative Program funds. And really what we need there are matching funds. So we have the TAP grants that are available, and we'll only have a certain amount that are available every year. So they're going to go on their own track. And TrailNet said for these particular projects, we will raise X dollars for each one of them. And we will not bond that extra portion for the matching funds and any other of the budget for that particular project until we've reached our TrailNet commitment to raise those funds. So they'll go through at a different pace than the other projects. Let's see, did I hit all the capital campaigns? And the Partners for Parks, of course, they've committed to raise $25,000 a year. That isn't to help pay off debt service or anything like that. That's actually to ensure that throughout all the improved recreational programming that we'll have throughout the community, that as much as we can, we support people and their financial ability to participate in those programs. It doesn't do anything to put up a new community center at Castle Rock if all the summer camps that run out of there aren't accessible to the kids in that neighborhood, right? So the Partners for Parks is not raising that money specifically for programs at the rec center, specifically for any particular project. It's specifically for recreational programming throughout the community. Mayor, did I tackle all the different things? What else?
Just sort of address the timing, because there
Yes.
still will be a need for an agreement with TrailNet. There'll still be a need for written agreement with Partners for Parks, I guess for the chamber. Is the plan to work on those during this time period? I hope it is, because the devil's always in the details, so.
Yeah, so certainly we have talked with the TBID about coming up with a memorandum of understanding for the financial support for the operational deficit of the rec center. We didn't really feel the need to have an MOU with those other groups, although if council feels that those would be important, I'm sure those groups would be amenable to that, and we could work through those things in pretty short order. They're relatively simple obligations that I don't think would be terribly complicated.
And I agree, the T-bid one's kind of the big one, right? $500,000 to $700,000 a year times however many years. And will somebody be working on that?
That's already in process, yes. Gina and the lawyer for the T-bid have already communicated on that. The resolution suggests that it should be done before Election Day. I would suggest if we could have it done sooner than that, great, but I don't think it has to be done by the end of August when we're ready to pass the resolution.
Okay, great, thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Pearson?
I just have a question. So, and I'm just going to go back to the Parks Foundation because that's for actual programming. So what if they don't meet their goal? What happens to the programming? If they do meet their goal and they have programming, then is that going to cover staff expenses? Because if you have additional programming, you're going to have additional staff. So where does staff play into that? And how does that affect the general fund budget for parks?
Okay, so the fact that Partners for Parks is honestly increasing their commitment to support recreational programming, because we already do some of that today. That doesn't have any impact on staff costs. A major premise of this whole push is to increase recreational programming throughout the community in a variety of different methods and facilities and timing and age ranges and what have you. That will require staff. In general, the recreational programming, the recreation side of the Parks Department, covers their costs through fees, through user fees, right? So we don't see a whole lot of new rec staff, with the possible exception of the South Park pool needing more lifeguards because they might have, should have a lot more people participating over there. But in terms of just general summer camps and those types of things, the revenues that we bring in should pay for the cost for the camps. What we're really talking about is Partners for Parks is increasing their support for those recreational programmings as we're increasing opportunities for kids.
Okay, but to answer the question, if that money didn't come through, I guess there wouldn't be as much of a budget for rec programming.
No. If that money didn't come through, there wouldn't be enough, there wouldn't be the increase in scholarships for people to participate. It wouldn't affect staff's ability to offer those programs.
At least not directly.
Right now, when we offer rec programs for summer camps, they sell out. Like, if you're not in there in a couple hours, they sell out, right? So it's not the fact that we don't have enough financial support for them. It's the fact that if you've got enough disposable income and time to make sure that you're on there first thing in the morning, you're ahead of the line and ready to go and get in there. As we increase those opportunities, we'll probably increase the need for scholarships, financial assistance for those camps.
Okay, great. Thank you. Councilmember Rowan.
Mayor, I'm not sure who can answer this or if anyone can answer this, but when we had our conversation last week, the TBID was here. They sort of represented their commitment to do some support for the operational deficit, but then they indicated a July 13th vote, and I was just wondering if anyone knew what happened.
Mayor.
Yeah, Councilmember Ripsis.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, they did support the meeting or the commitment as expected on July 13th. They're working on the exact language, and as I said, they're already starting work on the MOU. What they've said is they will support the operational deficit of the rec center up to $800,000 per year, which is above the level of what the master plan suggested we should expect.
Did they, if I could, Mayor,
Please.
did they take action on their existence? Because they'll have to re-up their existence. And I didn't know if
Yeah.
they accelerated that discussion or
They
not.
haven't taken action on that. It's still to be determined whether they renew early or wait till the 3 years and go, but either scenario should be hammered out through the MOU process.
Okay, that's good news. Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you to our hoteliers who make up the T bid for that. Councilmember Boyette?
So I guess I'm trying to, we have this resolution that Councilman Reps has said. Are we trying to change this? Are we trying to add to it? I mean.
I think either of the above, or subtract from. I think everything is on the table, so
Okay.
if people have.
So then, from a banker side, we've already asked the public to pay $143 million. That takes care of the whole thing. The $12 million extra that we're going to get is going to be a principal reduction or make payments on it, okay? Why would we want to reduce the budgets of all the other properties when we already have the 143 already, just because we didn't get the 12 million? So, I mean, I would like to get rid of this section that says if the capital campaign falls short of expectations, we would reduce the budgets of all the projects. Well, you don't have to, because we already have the 143
And I'll
million.
let Councilmember Rupsis respond to that. I suspect a little bit is pressure, politely put, you know, incentivizing giving. But that'd be my suspicion. Councilmember Rupsis, you want to comment on that further?
You're exactly right, Mayor. The incentive to actually, you know, meet that goal is important. Otherwise, the goal is meaningless, right? If we don't say there's some consequence to not meeting our goal, then nobody has to bother doing the fundraising. I get what you're saying. we certainly, but with the premise of wanting to show that community support for the projects, if we don't have some consequence to not showing community support, now, I guess we still have the community support because we passed the vote, but I think it goes to a level of financial commitment that people are stepping up and ready to support this.
But Councilmember Boyd, to your point, it is sort of a nuclear bomb. And maybe there's a way to finesse that a little bit, because these are both good goals, but I'd hate to get to 11,999,000 and have those kind of consequences, but I guess we can always go back and adjust this resolution.
One small clarification, the
6 and 6.
The trigger is $6 million, not 12, right? We're only talking about the capital campaign. The grants, probably, we can't apply for grants until we have the bonds passed, right? So they're kind of on their own side, but if we don't hit the $6 million, then that's when we talk about potentially, pulling monies from budgets.
And just a reminder for everybody who might be listening, thanks to Par Montana, they've committed $1 million plus another $1 million to match. If we assume that they'll have to pony up that million, then we're at $3 million. We're already 50% there, or at least in concept, or close to that 50%. So, Councilmember Joy, Councilmember Rowan.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And considering that in the master plan, there are also laid out ways that you can have, talking about naming rights and those types of things, there's probably ways that we could think of that as part of this overall capital investment that we need to. Maybe not, but it's an idea. Suppose you had a very well-placed business here in Billings who would like to have some naming rights, who would not make a donation, but would consider a buku amount of money for naming rights. That could be a part of our consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Rowan.
I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but I need this to be on the record. The people who I represent in Ward 2 have paid taxes into the park system for decades, only to see Castle Rock Park sit undeveloped. So I don't think they're going to get on board with a strategy that says, despite you having paid taxes and received limited return on investment, we're going to cut Castle Rock's budget if somebody doesn't want to put their name on an ice hockey rink. I think we really need to discuss the equity of this resolution and how we ensure that all neighborhoods benefit. This is a sticking point for me. The legacy parks that are waiting in line behind the rec center should not be penalized if that private sector fundraising doesn't come through.
Okay, Councilor Puritan, yeah.
Well, one of the comment that I want to make too is that when you look at the projects and the reductions that we had in, was it last week's presentation, what we're doing is that we're going to have parks that aren't complete. I mean, with $143 million, we're setting ourselves up to have incomplete parks. And where are those going to go in the next 20 years? Because that's what you're looking at is a bond. And in 5 years, it's stated in the resolution, we're going to come back for another levy, which will be for O&M. And I think those things need to be clear on the parks that you have been selected. I'm not sure who selected those parks, but those parks that have been selected will just have unfinished parks.
Yep. There's $230 million worth of need out there, and this is 143 of that. But I think there's some practical realities that about what people can even conceivably pay that led to those choices, unfortunately. Councilmember Boyette?
And just thinking about the public, they're going to vote for 143 million. So 2 years from now, they get a $12 million reduction. They're still going to be paying the same amount of money for the $143 million. It'll be hard to explain to them later, well, we reduced the mill levy. They think they're paying 143 at the beginning.
They would think that, that is a possibility. There's no doubt about it legally, but I'm going to ask Councilmember Ripsis. My understanding is that we would not go out to actually sell these bonds all at once at the beginning. But if those monies came in, then they would not be paying that $143 million. They'd be paying 143 minus.
And it's education again.
Yes, yeah. Did I get that right, Councilmember Ripsis, or should you want to comment anything on that? No, thumbs up, okay. Okay, council, it's almost 9. I don't know if there's, let's open up for public comment on this. Some interested players, I don't know if there's anybody who would like to comment, but do we have anybody in the audience who would like to comment on item number 4? And then we'll come back to council and see if there's anything before we wrap up. Any public comment on item number 4? Nobody is coming forward, nobody's online, so we'll close the public comment period on number 4. Anything further, council, before we go to last item? Okay, I'm not seeing, but please do continue to make your comments and refine those. We'll talk about how we can talk amongst yourselves, give comments to Gina, and we'll press forward. So thank you for the discussion. Councilor Pearson?
Well, what about are we going to form this committee? I'm willing to look at it.
Anybody object if that's done informally? I mean, I guess what I'm envisioning that'd be a pretty informal process, but it could be whatever level of formality the council envisions. Informal. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, in an informal way, and people want to participate, more or less, just talk to somebody, get involved.
We'll talk
get
among
involved,
ourselves, I suppose.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. So item number 5, upcoming items, Chris, whatever your name was, so that Kevin.
You do have the name Chris in front of you.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
It probably is confusing, I agree, at this hour, so. Yeah, the highlights coming up, budget amendments is on the next agenda. Andy will be presenting those, solid waste collection and disposal. That'll also be on there, and then I'll sum it up. The last items is annexations and zone changes are the items coming up next week on council, so.
Okay, thank you. And the budget packet, the packet is out, so you can start your reading pleasure. Any public comment on item number 5? No? Close that public comment period. Items of general council discussion? No? So any public comment on non-agenda items? No? We are adjourned.